Right.
Yeah.
When you have a plan.
There's a blessing. Yes, and he's actually.
Oh, that's good. We're gonna go ahead and get started, and we'll start with Member Flores. Do you have anything on the? Hold on to your seats. No. Oh, okay. Wait, well, let me ask you again.
Don't ask again.
I have one qualified question for you, but we want to count that. Okay, all right. All right, board member Joyce.
Yes. Of course I do. I would like to pull number 1, number 2, number 11.
Okay. Vice Chair Jones?
Oh, and number 22 as well.
Okay, in addition to 1 and 2, which she's already mentioned, 9 and 12.
You say 1 and 2 as well?
No, you had already pulled those. I said in addition to 1 and 2, 9 and 12.
And Member Anderson, do you have any? Two, 5, 8, and 20. Board Member Willie, do you have any that you would like to pull or discuss?
Yes, I have, I think I heard one already, at 9 and then 16.
1, 9, and 16. All right. So we will begin with number 1, which is approval of an amendment to the agreement between the School Board of Duval County, Florida and McGraw-Hill Education. Board Member Joyce, would you like the superintendent to read the recommendation, or do you want to just ask the question?
I just have a simple question, and I think it's addressed, but I just wanted to have clarification. So we're increasing the amount in this agreement by $20,000, and that is coming from Title I?
That is correct.
Okay.
Well, okay. Yep, Title 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I was
No,
clear.
But it's, yeah, Title 1, Title 4, they're very similar. So, yeah, Title 4.
Vice Chair Jones.
Oh, I noticed that we can add additional days. Who makes that determination? I think it's $2,500 per day.
Additional days of training.
Yes, on page 14. Professional development.
That is, the district makes the determination of how many days we want to have training. Because this will be new for kindergarten through second grade teachers, we feel like we need to make sure that professional development is very strong and that it's accessible.
And that will also come out of Title 4.
Yes.
Thank you.
Board Member Willie, did you have any additional questions?
No, no.
Okay. We are on to number 2. Application for renewal of charter school contract. Renaissance Charter School Inc. doing business as Duval County School at Flagler Center. Board Member Jones, would you like for the superintendent to read the recommendation, or you want to ask your question?
Just a question of the all the renewals. This is the only one that's a 15-year contract.
That is correct. Two, sorry.
The rationale for that is because they've been an A school.
That is correct. By state statute, if they qualify as a high-performing charter, they can ask for 15 years, and we pretty much have to approve. Well, at least I have to recommend that they get approved for 15 years.
If we don't, we stop them.
Yes.
Appeal. This is really more the states.
And I noticed when you look at all these renewals, none of them are outperforming the district schools on the scale on these. schools around the one at Flagler, all of them are day schools.
Yeah, very much, that's what I said that one's in my district, it's close to Bertram Springs and.
So, I mean, it seems like the charters reflect, by and large, the performance of the neighborhood schools. Just want to make sure that, they met all the requirements for a 15-year contract.
Speak chair to board member Jones.
Can I ask a quick question through the chair? If that's the case with them being sort of at par with the district schools, or is there any concerns? What has the attendance enrollment been like with other schools around that area? Is there any sort of information on that? Just high level.
Chair, that information is not in the renewal contract, but maybe.
Since it's in my district, I can tell you that all the schools in my district have an enrollment of anywhere from 800 students to 1,000 students. So if your question is, nonetheless, has that pulled students away from, like, this Flagler College is a K-8. I mean, Flagler charter is a K-8. So oftentimes students, because it sits between Bartram Springs and like the Twin Lakes middle, so a lot of times you will have students maybe land there versus going to Twin Lakes middle. So I mean, it has impact with students, but it has, because of the sizes of the schools in my district, it has not had a dramatic, if that's your question,
That is my question.
impact. But it does reflect the grades of the schools around it. Board Member Joyce, you have a question for number 2?
It's been answered.
Okay. Yes.
So my concern too was also the 15-year contract. It sounds like there's not an option to offer less than 15 years. I had also emailed Ms. Peak just asking about the capacities question. I noticed that, I think it's tab 9, where Seaside is applying for a new charter school. That there's a table on page 62 that includes grades and utilization, and I feel like that's a helpful table, even when we're looking at the renewal process, so we can kind of just conceptualize, how the charter school is impacting the neighborhood schools. So she said that she might be able to take a look at that, and I don't know if that would be helpful for us, but I think strategically moving forward as a district, we know we have to operate within the statutes that the state has given us. So how do we best ensure that the neighborhood schools around the charter school are able to perform and maintain capacity and keep their enrollment up? So I did ask.
So is that your bring back, is that you would like to see the utilization for Flagler? And as compared to other schools that surround it, is that your ask?
Flagler seems to be doing well. You were telling me it's not impacting the other schools, but there are other.
It impacts, because what happens with a charter school is that anytime you pull a few students from a school, depending upon the school and the size, so if a school loses 5 or 6 students, that could impact, a teacher. It could impact a resource teacher, depending on how many go. So sometimes, like you lose 3 or 6 students, but that can have a shift in,
Right.
and maybe now instead of a full, one full-time resource, I'm making this up, person, you have a part-time. So it does have impact.
Sure.
So you don't have to lose 100 students to have an impact on the school. Like you have, that's been my experience. I don't know other people in districts with charter schools, but you can lose 6 students and impact a teacher position.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the concern that I've heard expressed from the principal is the fact that when they return from that charter school back to the neighborhood school, that's when you don't get. It happens during the school year,
Right.
and the resources are not there. It creates an issue with class size and whether or not you have enough teachers to, and those dollars don't necessarily follow that student once that 20-day count is done. And that's the big challenge.
So I don't know if it, pleases the board or not to have that bring back this time, but I know at least for me, moving forward, having a good concept of what's happening as far as utilization goes surrounding these charter schools so that we can strategically as a district decide which schools are being maybe impacted the most or where we can look at programming. I mean, if we want to move forward with the idea that charter schools were developed to be these sort of learning laboratories, what is it about that charter school that's maybe pulling from another school, and how do we make sure that that programming or the sports or the customer service or whatever it is at the surrounding schools is strong enough to be able to withstand the growth of the charter.
So your bring back as a chart of utilization for surrounding schools around Flagler.
If the rest of the board feels like that's
Yeah, I think
something that would be
I think it'd be good
helpful.
for all the applications. We look at that.
Any other questions for number 2?
I just want to explain why we don't put that chart in. One, because these are renewals. The renewal process is to strictly focus on the charter and its own performance. And has it met the criteria set by the state for renewal? So that's why we don't put that chart in there, because at this point, we're no longer comparing them to their surrounding schools. We're comparing it to itself. And are they maintaining true to the contract that was put forward for the amount of years? And if it's not meeting those guidelines, then it still doesn't matter about the surrounding. We may be recommending not to approve it or recommending to approve it. And we don't want anything that may say, well, you're only doing this because of these schools, when in reality a renewal is only about the charter itself. So that's why we don't put it in the information. But if the board's will is to put it in there, then that's fine.
Is everyone clear on that the comparison for the renewal is the charter school against itself, not against surrounding areas, versus a new charter, which is based upon what the Green has shared, is probably why on tab 9 you see more information, because it's an application for a new school versus a renewal. So with that said, is there still an interest in seeing a utilization chart for Duval Charter at Flagler for the surrounding schools?
I think it's helpful context regardless. I mean, even if we're not focused, I think it's helpful to see trends on where that school is and other schools are, even if it's not a determination of the vote.
Well, I'd rather put it in, give it to you personally, and to the chair, to board member Welly, because whatever we put here, you're voting on that. And your vote, let's just say I was recommending to deny it, and that information is in there. You want nothing to come and, if they decide to appeal, they're gonna take whatever's inside documentation for the vote to say, I believe they were using part of this because we're not performing as well as their traditional public schools, and I'm making stuff in this scenario up. I said, I would rather just submit it to the board and say, here are the comparisons, not make it a part of the board approval process, because if any time they want to come back, these are the documents they're coming back to look for. So I'm just indicating why we separate two out. New, you want all the information, because the charter in its original format was supposed to provide something different that would separate them from the traditional schools within that area. And again, the renewal is about the charter against itself. We can supply the information that Board Member Anderson wants. I'm just suggesting that you don't make it a part of the agenda packet.
Is everyone clear on that?
I'm sure I made that good.
Let me go back too and just point out that you clarified previously that the fact that Duval Charter at Flagler is a high-performing school, there are then different guidelines in that renewal process versus a charter school that may not be a high-performing school. Is there any further discussion?
I was just, my thought in asking for it is less about the renewal because I understand that our hands can be a bit tied based on statute with what we're sort of required to renew and what we have to look at as far as measurements go. And so maybe it's a different meeting, a different item altogether that we should look at. If we're working in the context of charter schools are going to be here, right? They're not going anywhere. And certain schools are really high performing, which is all well and good, but then what's happening that pulls children from our neighborhood public schools that I also think are very fine educational institutions, and be able to kind of look at that critically to make a good business decision about how to keep students in our public schools. So maybe it becomes a whole different item to be able to
Yeah, so
review charters and find out.
Are you not satisfied with Dr. Green's idea that she would give it to us individually, but not put it in the recommendation, or are you still asking for it in the recommendation?
Several comments. My only thought is if we get it sort of individually or separately, when does there become a space for us to talk about it?
Through the chair to the board, that would be a workshop item that if you wanted to have conversation about all 33 charters, I would recommend that that's a workshop item. The and when I say give it to the board, it would be emailed to all board members. It wouldn't be like a meeting individually. Sure. And we can make it a workshop item that we talk about this particular charter. Why is this charter pulling from these other neighborhood schools? Or maybe, for example, in board member Hershey's district, all her schools are still very large, even though she has a lot of charters. It's because it's just a really, there's enough room for everybody. And there seems, that doesn't, I don't think it's about customer service or anything in that particular district.
Sure.
And most of the districts, I don't think has anything to do with customer service. I think it has to do with, hey, there's something different, and I get to choose, and I can get there, and therefore I go. I'm just saying, we will give you the information. I just don't think it belongs here because we are maintaining the integrity of the process that we're now judging this charter against itself, not other schools. So whatever the board desires, we will do.
I would agree with that. It makes sense. Having a workshop, yeah.
Was that okay with you getting this information to
We'll
the board?
we'll still get the information immediately.
Yes, just the information that's goes out for you, okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Vice Chair Jones?
That's all.
If our boards do a workshop, can we include not just utilization, but performance and graduation rates?
There's only one, we only have two charter high schools, right? River City at the beach, and then Duval Charter at Bay Meadows, so there's only.
The others are alternative.
Lone Star.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
They're in a different type of category.
Right, they're in a different, they're not.
But they're high schools.
Yeah, we can look at this, because they're high schools, but they're in a different category. I was thinking comparing, most of them are K-8s.
I say, yeah, through the chair. Like, I think I'm fine with the recommendation. When we're already comparing when we look at state assessment, we're already looking at this different schools through the state assessment anyway. So we're already comparing. So I know we said we're not comparing, but we are comparing. So if we're going to compare on state assessment, I feel like we're creating extra documents for ourselves.
I would say that the difference to me is that performance does play into and is allowed to play into the renewal process, whereas utilization isn't contemplated.
Well, performance against yourself, but we're comparing it against other people. So, I mean, I feel like we're creating extra workshops and documents when it could go into one, is my thought.
Do you, understand the difference between the renewal and
I
the
did.
new contract?
Yeah, I do.
I'm not, but you're saying you would still like to see the utilization in the recommendation?
That would be my recommendation because it's already in one document. It's one single document. It doesn't have to be necessarily utilized for that decision making, but we're already comparing when we're looking at state assessment. So,
Dr. Green, could you reiterate why it's not in there originally?
It's not in there because it no longer is a factor that we consider. I shouldn't say we consider. It's no longer a factor that's in consideration for the renewal of this particular charter. And I'm going to step out here on the limb. I think that chart was put in there because somebody else asked for it. Somebody, another board member may have asked for it, but I didn't know that was you, Mrs. Flores. I didn't know.
Is this current or past?
No, I didn't pass. I didn't.
At some point.
At some point, somebody asked for that. But when you are doing a renewal, it really is, you're supposed to be comparing that charter to the contract and to the criteria set, not the surrounding school. And like I said, whatever the will of the board is, we'll do it. But we're explaining why it's not in there, because the renewal process is not comparing it to their surrounding traditional schools. Because I'll make up an example. Let's just say that you have a charter renewal and it's a C, but all the surrounding schools are A and B. We can't make a decision not to renew that because, hey, we don't really need this school because all our other schools are A's and B's. Is it meeting the intent of its contract? Is it meeting? And if it's all yes, then you really have you don't have a justified reason to not renew it. And all I'm saying is, if we were, let's just say in this scenario, I'm recommending denial because our traditional schools are outperforming this charter, and therefore, well, they have now, you swayed the board because you put in your documents this information, and you really did not use the criteria set for renewal. So all we're doing is just saying, we think less is more, but whatever, if you want the utilization, we will add it. I was just explaining.
I wonder if we can put like a caveat in there, like a copy and paste as part of these charts and or a utilization chart that says this information should not influence the renewal or does not impact the decision or recommendation of the superintendent.
Through the chair to the board, there is language in the charter school statute where the academic performance, which is why it's in there,
Here.
in the renewals, the statutory language is the most important factor in considering whether to terminate or renew a charter school is the academic performance of all of its students. So in the context of a renewal, the statute contemplates a review of the academic performance, whether it's against itself or to others. I think to Dr. Green's point, if the school has even average grades, that may not justify a non-renewal, but until the legislature says otherwise, it is a factor that can be used as to the number of years for the renewal. And I think you see that trend throughout the recommendations. I hope that adds some context tied back specifically to the language in paragraph 8 of the charter school statute.
But utilization through the chair.
Is through the chair to...
utilization is not a factor at all.
It's not considered anywhere in the evaluation instruments or in the statute. And Palm Beach County actually litigated, and I don't think it was successful, whether programs were innovative enough. I mean, it's not quite utilization, but it's maybe the first cousin to it. And that it really wasn't in the statute. And recognizing that's what judges look at. They look at the legislative intent expressed through the enacted statute. And so that's where we are.
So where we are is the, there's been explanation as to why utilization rate is not in this item. And the superintendent has offered for the board a workshop on charters looking at utilization performance with the inclusion of graduation rates at a future workshop. Does that satisfy the board, or does the board still want the utilization chart in this document in lieu of the explanation given by the superintendent?
I think the workshop would satisfy the concern and not cloud the report that the superintendent has to provide for public record.
Is there consensus before we move on? Okay.
I would add, they can also include the racial makeup of each charter school, demographics.
I'm sorry, racial what?
Demographics.
The demographics of each school. There have been some discussions that charter schools go way too deep to segregate our schools. I just want to make sure that's not the
That will be insightful.
I wonder,
The question is that in the workshop?
Yes.
In the workshop, yes.
Can you put it in the report? No.
Board Member Anderson talked about what we're doing to keep our kids there, so maybe kids in we can just get information about all of the ideas that have gone on for us to try to get our kids back in the neighborhood schools. It's just, what are we doing? I mean, like choice there, obviously, is a biggie.
So are you asking in that choice workshop, when we look at utilization and the schools around charter schools, that we also know what programs are offered in the surrounding traditional schools?
And how we are trying to get our own kids back.
So I'll read that list again, that we'll have a workshop that looks at utilization, performance, graduation rates, demographics, and compares the traditional schools around each charter school with the programs that are offered by the charter school versus the traditional schools. Is there any further discussion before we move on? We are on number, let me ask people, did you have any that you wanted to pull?
Well, the one that y'all just talked about.
Okay, and was there another one?
Yeah, and it's in the, it's just a question. It's page 175, it's only one of the policies, 6.17.
Okay.
6.17 is the policy.
Tab 20.
All right.
Okay, I do have it.
So we are moving on to number 5, Board Member Anderson, and that is application for renewal of charter school contract, Global Outreach Charter Academy, doing business as Global Outreach Charter Academy. Would you like for the superintendent to read the recommendation, or would you like to ask your question?
I think just ask my question.
Okay.
I was looking again at the contract term, the 5-year term, and the number of categories that were noted as partially compliant. Seems like there's a large number that were partially compliant. Not exactly sure what that means, if they're only partially compliant, and why we would make a 5-year recommendation versus something less.
Chair, I'm going to ask Ms. Peak in her department to address this particular item.
Okay, through the chair to the board, with regards to the ratings, your question is?
It seems like a lot of partially compliant categories. And I was wondering if there's more context about what partially compliant maybe means for this school, and whether or not there is potential to offer less than 5 years in the contract.
Okay, I will have to, and in the absence of our charter director, wasn't able to be here with us this morning, get a deeper level of clarification, because based on the instrument that's used and the fact finding, they were in a position where they were able to be recommended for the number of years that they were requesting. I will
Through the chair to Board Member Anderson, are you looking at page 46?
Page 40.
Okay. It's, on yeah, on page 46, it says the instructional strategy.
That's for
Yeah,
Oh,
we're on 38. Yeah.
We're on
Oh,
five.
I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong item. So I've moved back now to page 5. Sorry.
It's okay. Page 40 is where we can see that there are only 4 categories that were fully compliant and 9 categories that were partially compliant. And again, I'm new to this process, as everyone is well aware. So is that normal that we are offering a 5-year renewal when well over, it looks like about 2/3 of the categories are not fully compliant?
Through the chair to Board Member Anderson, if a charter is impartially compliant and the charter office believes that even though they're impartially compliant, we can work with them through the contract to mitigate most of those, they would continue to recommend. And standard is 5 years. If we see something really not compliant, such as academically, you're below a C, or your financials are severely in the deficit, we would recommend something less than 5 years. But
And you
and
too, this
since I was on the wrong one, this particular one did have a D, but for the 2 straight years it's been a C. So it's in our traditional schools, if they make 2 C's in a row, then they are moved out of our turnaround region, and now they're back in whether it's just straight elementary or straight middle school region. So for me, I kind of use the same logic. They did have a D, but they recovered. They've been a C for 2 years in a row. The information that was given to me on partially met was not so substantial that I would be concerned that they couldn't rectify those areas.
Mhm.
So that is why the recommendation is for a standard 5 years.
But what if they drop, sorry, for the chair to Dr. Green, what if we extend the contract for 5 years, but then they drop that to a D for the next year or for the next 2 years? That doesn't alter the contract at all?
Well, we can always come back and did you want to say something? We can always come back and revisit the contract, but
Through the chair to the board, again, the statute says academic performance is the most important factor. There's health, safety, welfare. During the term of the contract, you look at the performance of the school, but again, the way the statute is written, academic performance is the most important factor. And the legislature has spoken in that 2 consecutive Fs equals termination. But short of that, there may not be statutory cause to terminate, whether it's during the term or non-renew. Judges also look at the way the statute's written. Health, safety, welfare is very important. And then areas of non-compliance would need to be material, really important, not technical deficiencies. That probably, again, the way the statute is written and therefore the judges interpret, just technical violations which may account for some of the partially compliant probably will not be enough.
Thank you.
And, Ms. Justin, could you just clarify too, it's my understanding that based upon statute, it's, I'm going to say easier to close a traditional school than it would be to close a charter school.
Thank
Is
you.
that a fair, simple statement, or could you clarify that?
To the chairman and to the board, there are different paths and standards applicable to charter schools compared to traditional schools. The differentiated accountability for low-performing schools, there are different paths is there. So it's not for me to judge whether one's easier than the other, but they are different.
I will ask the superintendent, because that's.
Okay, I've got to be.
Okay.
I will set the
It's
table.
business to me. Oh, I understood. She just can't say exactly the answer that you were getting after.
I set the table for
Thank
Dr.
you, so
Green.
Dr. Green, we're gonna pass that question to you.
The question is it easier to close one of our traditional schools than a charter? And the answer is yes.
That's not thank you, that was what I was getting at, thank you very much. Is there any more discussion on number 5 before we move on to, we are now on number 8, board member Anderson. And 8 is application for renewal of charter school contract, Growing Great Girls Doing Business as Waverly Academy, board member Anderson.
I guess I was just a little confused about some of the language. Let me look back at my notes. Second year renewal contract. I'm on page 54. The school serves 100 students in grades 6th through 5th. Is that the?
The typo.
Okay.
It's 8.
It should be 6 through 8. Is that what it is?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I was just a little confused. Is it only a middle? 6. Okay, 6, 8 school. Okay. Under fulfillment of provisions, chapter, paragraph 2. 1 year.
Okay.
1 year in 2016, 2 years in 2017, and now we're recommending a 3-year. Just seemed a little odd. Again, we have about half, maybe a little under half of the categories are partially compliant.
Through the chair to board member Anderson. If we go back to the question, is it easier to close our traditional school than a charter? The answer is yes. My rationale for recommending 3 years is, one, they will continue to say you've given us no real opportunity to create consistency, because first you approved a 1 year and then a 2 year. My past life, 3 years would be what we would consider for a low performing one. If we decide that we're going to recommend closure at the end of that contracted period, or anytime we can reasonably say we have given you an opportunity, we have done whatever it is we felt we needed to do to support the school, and if it is not better, then we feel like we have a stronger foundation to stand on for recommending closure. But that is why I'm recommending 3, because it's been a choppy 1 and 2. If we're going to give this school an opportunity to be successful with middle school girls, then we need to give them the amount of time. But as Ms. Chastain said, academic performance is but short of 2 Fs, it's going to be very hard. If you look at the trend of closing charters in the state of Florida, academics has not been it. It's always mostly been about financial. And like I said, short of you have 2 Fs, that was the one thing they did put in, and most districts, if they had charters, they closed them. Well, the law says you have to close them. But here, we need to not give them 5 years, one, and it's based because your academic performance hasn't shown that you're going to be successful over the next 5 years.
And you feel like 3 years is a more solid
3 years is
than
the
a
same.
2-year?
3 years, remember I said I try to look at what we do for our traditional.
Mhm.
If this was, this school, 2Ds, they would now be in turnaround status.
Right.
And it's sort of a 3-year process. First year, it can be a district managed turnaround, and then the next, let's say it doesn't happen, then you have to choose an EO, and that's 2 years, so that equals 3 years. So that kind of falls in line.
I hear that. I just still feel like there's 100 children that are sitting in a school that's not performing well, that's only partially compliant with the contract, and we're giving them more time than we've given them in the past. So it's hard for me to wrap my head around.
Well,
Could you explain again, the renewal process, and what qualifies for a renewal, and if we do not approve a renewal, then what their opportunity of appeal is, and what the outcome typically is when they do an appeal?
The renewal process again is there's a rubric. Rubric probably is not the right word. There's criteria, and the sponsor, which is the district, goes out and reviews how well are you meeting the criteria in your contract that you were under. And again, when you say partially, that means they are doing something that is at least in the ballpark, okay with that particular category. For us to go through, they would appeal it, but for us, the state is going to look at, well, if they were partially, what has the sponsor done to support them to get to fully met? And that is where we're the sponsor.
Just to be clear, okay.
Yes, we're the sponsor.
They didn't ask us to do that.
You're just voluntarily sponsored.
Yes.
Charter.
Yeah, we're the sponsor.
Is that
And the second thing I want to point out, and it's when we will not have a very good chance of winning this if they appeal it, because they are, for the most part, with a little support, they probably would be in compliance with those categories that they are supposed to meet. The partially evident is just we need to come back and support them. It's not evident is where we have a stronger case to not renew them, and that's not present here.
So 2 thoughts come up, 3 thoughts come up during that. One, I'm not necessarily suggesting that we not renew. My concern would be the term of the contract for renewal. 2, in looking at the renewal process and what we've outlined as the 3 steps, and this may be something we maybe come back to in our charter workshop. Are these steps pretty consistent with what's happening across the state? How did we decide on this renewal process? Is this something that's outlined statutorily? And 3, I understand that we have certain bounds, and academic performance is really important in that, and short of an F, multiple Fs, and financial problems.
And health, safety, welfare. Health, safety, welfare.
Health, safety, welfare, but now we walk into technicality zone. So I don't want to be in technicality zone. Are we making it still? I don't want it to be easy. You know, I still want to hold a high standard. Are we allowed to say you have to meet these expectations? We're setting high expectations here without it being just a cakewalk and an easy pass. And if we have to go back in, I mean, we're talking about going back in and now as the sponsor, working with them closely to make sure that they're doing all of these things, which takes our time and money and effort. I mean, that's just a lot. I mean, from a business standpoint, thinking like, that's a lot to do. Maybe I'm saying things that have already been said. I just haven't said it too.
To the chair,
Go ahead.
this is one of these moments, I'm going to say something that Ms. Chastain cannot say. Those high standards and the bar that has to be done when they are initially coming as a new charter. That's when you have to really make that decision, because once they are a charter, it again is financial is what will lead to a closure of a charter or 2Fs. Anything short of that, it will be a struggle for us to say, no, we're gonna non-renew you, and we will do that for 5 minutes, and then they're gonna submit an appeal, and we will not fare, I don't believe we will fare well in that appeal process. We will lose, and here are the things I think about. These 100 students, their parents chose to go to this Waverly Academy. And if we go through that process and we put out, we're closing, and then we have now disrupted 100 families trying to figure out, well, what's my next step? Where are my children going? What's happening? If we don't feel we have a strong, and as I'm reading the recommendation and I'm reading on these pages, I don't feel we have a strong foundation to stand on to say we're going to deny you. Or if the board's desire is, okay, well, we would rather you just do 1 year renewal, then that would be a much better recommendation than stating, I feel like we should renew them.
Right, and for clarity, that is not my recommendation. My recommendation is not to not renew. For many of these, it is the length of contract. If I had a student in my classroom who tested poorly, I wouldn't say, well, I'm just not going to test you again until right before the FSAs, right? I would probably increase the frequency with which I reassess to get some formative information to find out how I can best work with them. So if I just say, okay, well, I'm going to now renew your contract for 3 years, how are we going in and how are we able to look critically at what's happening there?
So through the chair to Dr. Green, that is really, I think, what my thought process is as well. What are we doing to support? I mean, you're saying we're the sponsor, and so as the sponsor, we have an obligation to support this charter and to work with them to improve their grade. Is that what is that true?
Through the chair to Ms. Board Member Joyce, that's partially. When I say what have we done, it's more about informing. So if you're partially met, as a sponsor, we should tell them, what does it take to meet evidence? We don't send, oh, well, let's provide reading coaches. No, that is not our role. Our role is simply to be a liaison between the school, the sponsor, the school district, and the charter to ensure, one, are you meeting the guidelines of your contract? And two, are you meeting the guidelines that are set by the state, that these are the areas we are to evaluate how well you are meeting those standards. So when we say, did we provide support, it is, did we go out and meet with you and say, this is what is missing at your charter school? We have a charter school now that we probably will have a second meeting with them to say, you need to tell us how you're fixing this problem. Because if we've already met with you, we've given you direction, we've given you access to resources that could possibly support your charter, but to date, we find that you have not done any of that. And then they'll come to a point where I will have to make a recommendation about that particular charter. But we're not going out there to help them fix their issues. When I say resources, it's more of advice, or here is a direction you should consider going. But if the board feels that 3 years is too long to give this school, as I stated, minus it having 2 Fs, we'll just keep renewing 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. And I think 3 years at least gives the school an opportunity to try to improve. It once was a C, to try to get back to that level for this particular middle school.
What's the will of the board to keep it at what the superintendent has recommended as 3 years, or would you like to adjust the length of the renewal? Vice Chair Jones?
Sure, I think that was the gist of the question, how long should the contract be? What's the advantages and disadvantages of a 1-year contract? Does that mean that the choice office has more work to do on a 1-year contract versus a 2 or 3 year contract? The 1 year or 2 year contract, I think, will give us opportunity to review it to make sure they're on track in making those improvements, especially when they're partially compliant. But just through the chair to the superintendent, what would be the disadvantages of a 1 or 2 year contract?
To the chair, to Board Member Jones, I don't know that I can give you the best answer because I don't know the workload of the other charters coming forward for renewal. We have 33 of them. Me personally, I don't know that. Next year, do you know how many charters are up for renewal?
I don't know the number that are up for renewal next year. The way of work is going to continue to be the same. The process will be the same. Through the workshop, we will walk through exactly what it is from application stage to renewal stage so that you as a board will know what work goes into the sustainability of our charter schools. Or not.
I think back to the chair, to Board Member Jones and the board, I think it all really relies on how many charters continue to apply for new applications, because that's one set of workload. How many charters are up for renewal, that's another set of workload. And then just the normal process of monitoring charters, because we have one charter that's in a particular situation that is quite dire. And so it's all these different levels of workload. But whatever the will of the board is, we will pick up the workload and do it.
Well, I think given that we have a workshop pending, I would go ahead and support the superintendent with a 3 year contract. I said, given the fact that we have a workshop pending on the charges and the superintendent recommended 3 years, I would support the 3 year renewal until we get a good understanding of criteria and some of the workload that they're going to be confronted in the next year.
We're going around to you.
Was it my face?
I thought you were going to say something.
No, I think I agree. I think if we do a 1 year, it may, obviously, they need a lot of help. And just say, forget it. But I think, we need to give them as much time as I would even wait for the 3 years is fine. I think it's hard since we've been living the charter stuff for so long. And we have had opportunities to go in to the Tallahassee when things are sent to us, or when we are trying to get something done that we think, particularly for charter schools. I don't think we've had any that actually were upheld, right? The charter schools, yeah.
Oh, actually.
Charter schools that we have amended.
It's mixed. Through the chair, it's mixed, but if I may, Madam Chairman, this process that the district has been using for the past 5 or 6 years, using the state mandated evaluation instrument and the rubric for the application, the evaluation instrument, and really going through and deeply analyzing and committing to writing a written report has helped us considerably. I mean, it was a mixed bag many years ago. My first charter school appeal was in 2001. So when it was the governor and cabinet hearing it and not the state board of education. So when we have denied applications, for example, that's what goes to Tallahassee, and those have been upheld. In the instance of a renewal or non-renewal, it goes to the Division of Administrative Hearings. And so that's what I mean when I say the judges interpret the statute as written. Academic performance is the most important factor. Health, safety, welfare is mentioned in the statute, which is why I keep putting it into the record that that's another important factor. When it comes to other areas, material violation of law, financial issues, it has to be material. So if it's technical non-compliance, standing alone may not be enough. But when you put everything together, academic performance, if there are any health, safety, welfare issues, and if there's anything material, for example, in the financial area, if there's something intentional and fraudulent, that would be important. If it's something that was just a negligent lapse of internal controls, that's going to have a much lesser weight. And that's what the judge evaluates through the hearing and gathering the facts, assigning credibility, what's more important than the other, and looking at the statutory plan that the legislature has put out as to what's more important than something else. The legislature also created a clear and convincing standard. That's our burden. It's more difficult to reach than a preponderance of the evidence, which is just barely over a majority. So all of these things make this, where the legislature had created these to almost be licenses and not just a contract, much more of a property interest. So I think Dr. Green's recommendations and analysis, and through this commentary, Dr. Green through the district to the board is taking the lengthy charter school statute and the plan that the legislature has set up, and that's what is formulated for recommendation.
Vice Chair Jones has indicated that, especially due to the upcoming workshop to discuss charters more in depth, that he would support the superintendent's recommendation. And Board Member Grimes has indicated that she would tend to agree with that. Is there anyone else who would like to weigh in either in agreement or disagreement with the superintendent's recommendation for 3 years? I would just also like to add that I believe I heard Ms. Chastain point out that the tool used to consider renewals is a state standard tool. Is it a tool put forth by the state versus one that we solely created? Was that, did I hear that correctly?
I may not have been clear, Madam Chairman. We use the tools that the state has mandated. There really isn't something for renewal, but we use the criteria that's set forth in applications and in the statute to come up with. So for renewal, not necessarily, but we were, I think, talking about a number of things, applications for new schools and renewals. There's quite a bit that's been regulated by the state, but the renewal rubric, not necessarily. We're looking at the way the statute's written.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any further discussion?
I have a quick comment or question. I agree with the recommendation. I think 3 years, especially as based on what the superintendent has said. Quick question, within the contract, I know there's a enrollment cap that we talk about. Is there also an enrollment minimum in contracts at all?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
But Ms.
Yeah.
Chastain.
Right.
So that's all through the chair to Board Member Willie. The state has adopted a form contract, and the way the statute is written, if you can still negotiate the contract, but if you deviate from the state, the presumption is the district is presumed to have interfered with the intended flexibility of charter schools. The state's standard contract does not include a minimum. Duval, for many years, because many of our charter schools basically closed themselves due to financial insolvency, landlords would evict them and there'd be no place for the school to be, and that would be why the school would terminate and would end. Duval has had for many, many years a process where we look at what is your minimum enrollment that you need to operate. But the state has not picked up that minimum enrollment concept, which is tied specifically to financial solvency as part of its standard form of contract. So Duval's had it, the state does not. The way the charter school statute has been amended over the years is more and more to a very standardized form.
Thank you.
So moving on to number 9, which is charter school application for Seaside School Conservatorium to open Seaside Charter North Campus, board member Willie, followed by Vice Chair Jones.
Yeah, so this is one of our only new contracts, and I know that they've had other schools open. I am wondering about, at first, as a blanket statement, I think this is always an interesting conversation to have because these are also our students that are going to be attending whatever school we have, and we have to make sure that they're entering in the best. So I appreciate your comment, Dr. Green, about our biggest phase is making sure we're opening, or if they're going to open a charter school, making sure we're keeping the right bar in line. I'm just wondering about the conversation that happened, or if it did happen around, this is like a school that's right in the middle of both, like a Garden City, Pine Estates. I see one, I didn't realize the Pine Estates enrollment was 140%. Is that like a real 140, or is there something underneath that number that I don't know about because I didn't think that was accurate? And then the Garden City number, just the demographics piece, because it sits right in the middle of both of those schools. I mean, enrollment, not demographics, the enrollment piece, like capacity piece.
Utilization.
Yeah, utilization.
Utilization is accurate. Through the chair, Dr. Green, to Mr. Willie, this is the utilization as it was when this chart was pulled. And of course, in some of the communities, it's just revolving, it just depends, but this is utilization as it is.
Okay. And then my other piece too, and I know I'm excited to talk about this in the workshop, but there's a lot of, once again, as Board Member Anderson mentioned, there's a lot of partial pieces there, especially to open up. Is this a normal sort of phase when charters enter in? Do they always have a lot of partials until they actually physically open their doors? Or even another comparison would be in a workshop. Is this something that we see as a norm even with our traditional neighborhood schools? Is there's always a partial piece happening throughout the process?
Through the chair to Board Member Willie. No, this isn't. Oh, no.
Okay.
Many, I don't know whether I want to say norm. This particular application is the same application that all new charters are required to fill out. And the rubric isn't so detailed that says, oh, if you meet this many out of the 19 criteria, that's a go ahead. If you don't meet this many out of 19, that's a no go ahead. It is us reviewing, okay, what are these partially met, and can these be mitigated during contract negotiations, or really, no, they cannot be mitigated. And so that's what I will be reviewing to make that determination of whether I would recommend this charter to open or recommend denial of the application.
Got it.
Vice Chair Jones.
Does the Seaside have a charter with us already? Two. Is this the one that was supposed to report a diversity plan? Same one?
Yes, this is the same charter that's supposed to.
Have we received that plan?
But
When did that happen?
That's a year ago. About a year ago, we had this conversation.
I want to,
Yeah.
this, to Mr. Jones through the chair.
You're not an attorney.
Never once.
The better question is, what should the plan look like? Seaside will tell you they are working on increasing the diversity in their schools. Yes.
It's difficult for me to support a new application for this particular charter when we've asked multiple times for that diversity plan. I mean, this is crazy.
There's no plan at all.
And when we had a meeting about a year ago as a board, when representative was there to address us, and we asked about the diversity plan, I think one of the reasons given for lack of diversity had to do with the application process, and I had a hard time connecting those dots. But Dr. Green, regarding state law and rules, when charter schools receive good grades and appear to be successful, does that not give them a right, in a sense, in the eyes of the state to expand? Do we have any way to, any leeway in not?
through the
no matter
chair,
if that's state, by the state, sorry.
no, through the chair to the board. And since I'm not a lawyer, I'm going to state my opinion, and then Ms. Chastain can come behind me with a lawyer opinion. In my opinion, the answer is no, because this is not a similar demographic. They have to demonstrate that they are successful with a similar demographic of students, and the current two charters that they have, we're doing apples and oranges.
And could you tell us where they're located?
San
San Jose and maybe, yeah, and now at the beaches. That was the only one I really knew.
They're in at the beaches and
Yes.
off of San Jose Boulevard. Remember Grimes?
I know your face. It's just my face. Well, I was blown away by his comment that asking about that plan, because we had, I think the higher ups of the charter school, and they stood there and told us they were sending it like the next week. So that is very bothersome.
And I would say that the conversation regarding expansion of the 8th grade and that, I believe that it came up during that board meeting that at least 4 of us were at. Again, asking about, that was the second time at a formal board meeting, we had asked for a diversity plan that was getting it. I would just share that my concern is with a location on the north side, does that then to Seaside Charter, say, well, then we are now diverse, because of the location, not because of a diversity plan that's been demonstrated at the 2 existing schools already. Although I do believe we heard from every diverse student at their school at one of our board meetings last spring.
Can I ask a quick, so point of clarification, so before we were on the board, we asked them for a diversity plan, and currently they have not submitted any documentation that gives us any sort of plan. Is that?
Correct.
I'm to the chair, to Mr. Willie, I'm going to pull to see what they sent electronically to us so that I can speak.
Ms. Chastain.
Through the chair to the board, I believe, although I don't have a copy of it. I believe a plan has been submitted. So I think the concern might be the results of the plan. There was a question earlier about high academic performance of the two schools. The first one, a K-5, has the grade history and meets the criteria and has been deemed by the state to be high performing. The other school, the K-8, just isn't there yet for whatever reason, but the K-5 has a high performing. If you are a high performing charter, when you apply, if you're seeking a replication, you have certain presumptions toward approval, and if the charter application of a high-performing replication is denied, it takes an expedited path for appeal through the state. One of the issues, and it's somewhat described in the first paragraph of the description, is that it mentions that the K-5 is high-performing and that this applicant sought a replication, but their application's for a K-8, and so that's not a replication. So I think that issue is put aside as to what does the K-5's high-performing status mean. It doesn't mean anything in the context of an application for a different grade configuration. That actually has been litigated. Replication means same grades. It doesn't mean I was successful in elementary school and therefore I'm deemed, exactly expedited, and higher standard for a middle or a high school. And even with the discussion of the diversity plan, I believe one has been submitted, and I think the district will be able to verify that. There are other elements, so it wouldn't be, depending on Dr. Green's recommendation, it wouldn't be the only reason, although hearing the concerns of the board.
Didn't we, it seems like a year ago, give this school, make an exception where they already had a K-8 on San Jose Boulevard?
No, it's a K-5.
Well, is it San Jose?
That's where it was.
That's where it
was.
that was my question. So
They
is
weren't
that-
operating it.
They were not operating, it was going to be an add-on. Due to inability to complete paperwork in a timely manner, there was discussion about, it wasn't able to be added at the original K-5 at the beach. But this board made an exception, an allowance, gave a grace in spite of all of the opportunities to complete that paperwork in a time, that documentation in a timely manner. We changed the addresses, right?
Through Madam Chairman, you amended each contract. There were two approved contracts, the existing K-5 at the beach and the existing K-8 in San Jose that hadn't fully, reached all their grade levels. The resolution of the school's request to add grade 6 to the beach's location was to amend each contract and swap addresses so that the K-8 now officially resides at the beach and the K-5 is their San Jose location. So we amended both contracts. We had something to switch with versus simply adding grades.
But go ahead.
Madam Chair, I just want to say, I'm going to talk about a lot of time and energy from our staff. I think that Ms. Chastain could tell you the amount of hours that went into this. And I think that's at times a problem because yes, we want to be supportive, we want to be able to help them with whatever they need, but at the same time, when they're being late, and seemingly want special favors that other charters don't have. So
There's a pattern of inability to comply within a timeline. Is that a fair?
I will start by saying that I think in the spirit of charter schools and the charter school movement as it was theorized in providing something different and innovative and being able to pilot in a more nimble environment, that this school really does offer something different, creative, that speaks to particular needs of particular children. And I do think that in the spirit and theory of the academic and environmental side of charter schools, that they do represent that, and that is the spirit in which this school was created, which is not true of all of our charter schools. That being said, do we know, this says Seaside is in negotiations with a developer for a facility north of the river that has been in construction over the last year. Do we have an address for that facility? Do we know where it is? I'm not sure that knowing the address will answer my next question, but I'm going to start there.
I just understand that it's off of Dunn Avenue.
Yeah.
That's all I know.
I had heard that it was a former church.
Yeah, it was the
That was
former,
information I got.
the former site for Joint Ayers Church.
Okay.
Brand new
Um,
facility. Brand new.
Because I've had extensive conversation with the school about these diversity issues that we've talked about with board members and others. And I have to tell you, I was really surprised that following all of those conversations, that the new school site is a block off the river on San Jose Boulevard. And without offering transportation, can make it very difficult to meet some of the diversity desires of this board, as well as I think, you know, there is some genuine interest by some of the people who represent the school. So, and I say that because I haven't talked to all of them, not because I think that there's genuine disinterest that I have observed. So I just, in thinking and contemplating an additional site, notwithstanding the application and the contract issues, and, you know, we have to make sure that all of those are in line, and I appreciate the reservation on making a particular recommendation until we know what those things are. That the address and the accessibility is really important to being able to meet whatever diversity plan or goals are laid out, because charters are not required to provide transportation. So the location is important to, and probably more important than with our district charter schools, to allowing for a diversity of access. So I think, you know, to the degree that statute allows us, and to the degree that this school is really open to the conversations with the board, and I think they are more so than I'll just say I think they are. I mean, we got to get to a better execution place with this. Not just talking about it, not just planning, not just attempts, but, you know, and to that end, I'd like to see, I think it's been a while since we pulled the data on their current enrollment, so could I just recommend that we understand the diversity of the current enrollment in the two sites that they have open, notwithstanding that this would be a separate charter with a separate accountability and that kind of thing. Yep, but it looks like the superintendent maybe has some of that information. No.
No, I don't. No, I just want to the chair, to Ms. Smith Flores, there was the key word you just said for me, separate. Based on what we understand is the location of this new particular charter, this would be separate. The diversity would be at this particular site and not at the others. And for me, that is disconcerting, because this district has spent numbers of years to get to unitary status. And basically, from my perspective, that's what's being created. A separate but equal. That's how we'll get we'll just put a location in a in the majority of the neighborhood. I'm not saying 100%, but that your beaches will be less diverse, and then your if that's where, because that's where I was told where it was, off of Dunn Avenue, will be more diverse, and that is where, well, as I said, when you bring in a new, that's where that's a standard that I feel is unacceptable. That you're going to have locations that the majority of the students there will be non-minority, and then you're going to have a location where the majority of the students will be minority. So from my statements, you should get what my recommendation will be.
Vice Chair Jones?
Yeah, I guess my concern is the gamesmanship that's going on. Because if you recall, those who were here, May of last year, I think it was, we had 2 applications that the staff recommended now. One was Dunn Avenue, and I forgot what the other one was, the same location. The developer had given this charter, some other charter, an application to apply. And in the application, they put that every school in that area was failing. And the staff recommended denial because that was not true. None of the schools in that area failed. So now this same developer has gotten maybe the same charter, I'm not sure, to reapply and I guess provide accurate and honest information this time as to the grades of the school in that area. And we withdrew it because they did not want the application to be denied. So that was May of last year. We had 2. One, this location on Dunn Avenue, and the other one I can't recall, but it was 2 that we withdrew in May of last year, and we assumed they would come back. I just have a real concern that we are creating 2 separate and I guess supposedly equal schools, and if this will allow them to increase their diversity, I think it's unfair and does not meet the real intent of the charter legislation.
If I could ask Ms. Chastain, knowing state statute and law, if the recommendation was to deny and if the board agreed with that, what then kind of appeals process would take place? And would this charter school, based upon state law, have an opportunity to go through appeals and still get a yes and overrule the decision of the board and recommendation of the superintendent?
Through the chair to the board, first of all, I want to go back. There's 2 different appeal paths. A high-performing charter application has an expedited appeal path, and a regular charter application has a different path. So the first thing that I would need to distinguish is that this is in fact not a replication of a high-performing charter, because I think this is a K-8 and the high-performing is a K-5, and those are obviously not the same.
Can I ask you a question? And I don't mean to interrupt, but it says the Seaside K-8 charter school had a grade of an A.
It does.
So, but why would you say it's not high performing if it's got
They
an
need longer history.
A? Okay, that's
So perhaps not yet. Not yet. So not as of this moment. The K-8 does not have the high-performing designation from the state. Is that correct, Ms. I think that's correct. So a regular application appeals, it goes to the Charter School Appeal Commission, which consists of an equal number of charter operators and traditional district staff. A recommendation is formed. It's a little hearing, if you will, and the Charter School Appeals Commission makes a recommendation to the State Board of Education to enter a final order. And essentially, what they look at, of all the reasons for the denial, was it good cause for the denial? So technical issues may not carry the day. There are 3 separate sections. There's the education plan, there's the kind of the operational plan, and the governance plan, if you will. And we have different sections in the evaluation instrument. So a diversity plan, or lack thereof, in and of itself may not be enough. But typically, when the superintendent recommends a denial, it's really in a number of areas where there are deficiencies, including all 3 areas. And remember, I mentioned education plan, operations plan, and financial plans, things like that. So that's what we would be looking at, and I think we're still evaluating, using the state's evaluation instrument, what those reasons would be. And so in net, we have to look at the whole picture. And even if the whole picture is very good, for either party, it goes through the Charter Schools Appeal Commission and ultimately the State Board of Education. Once the State Board of Education enters its order, the next level of appeal, which sometimes is taken, although it's very rare, would be to an appeal to the First District Court of Appeal. And so that's the path. So, Madam Chairman, right now, I don't know what the superintendent's recommendation is going to be, and I don't know all of the details that would support that, but that's something that we look at even before we bring it to you.
I think that clarification is good, particularly for new board members to understand the process, and that just, there's always an opportunity that, I don't want to say in spite of the superintendent's recommendation and the board's decision, that the state could determine a different outcome.
Correct.
And I appreciate you spelling that out. Board Member Grimes.
It's surprising to me that when the application was met standard on 8 sections, partially met the standard on 13 sections, and did not meet the standard on 1 section, because they've been through this before. And I was referring to the staff's time and energy that they put in to the last time. I think that's something that's really troublesome.
It's not the first rodeo you think. That was around the block, they would be aware. Is there any further conversation or discussion about item 9?
Thank you to the chair. We haven't been through this process, so I know it was sort of left blank and it's sort of approve or deny. What is the process normally after this point? Do you listen to this recommendation and take the information that you have and then come back at the actual board meeting? When do we find more information about that? And then I have a follow-up to that too.
When this is published, when we publish this for public, everything has to be inside. Well, everything as much as possible. There's always an opportunity. Oh, we have an emergency and this didn't make it. We need to. So at that point, the recommendation normally is stated. What my recommendation.
Then you would notify the board
Yes.
as to your recommendation.
Yes.
And if I may, the Charter School statute aligns with agenda publication. We have the statutory obligation to notify the applicant. So it really is 7 days. It's the week before it's done.
So
Before the meeting.
7 days prior to the meeting, it would be published and your recommendation would be made known.
And we affirmatively notify the applicant because the statute requires us to do that.
Could I ask in this specific cases, we've had a lot of discussion that at the time that it's published, that the board be notified of this specific recommendation? Could we? I think it's that everybody would like to know. Board Member Willie.
Yeah, the other thing was, I know we've been talking about diversity plans, so of course we'd love to see that as a bring back, but also, I think that also ties in. I think for me, it's less about demographics and like just having the number of students. but more about the school culture or discipline sort of piece that comes into play when you have a different demographic of student. So for me, it's also looking at that to see if that connects, which as I think it should, to that sort of diversity plan. And then the other statement would be, I know it said, I'm not sure how, I don't know how it works, but it said they're in negotiations with the developer, and then it said they meet the facilities needs. So I don't understand how you can just say we have something lined up and that's good, or do you have to have something more formal to be able to sort of meet that standard?
To the chair, to board member Willie, I don't know that you actually have to have the lease signed and all, you don't have to have all of that done at this stage. It is when you get to contract negotiations that more of that needs to be solidified. They've at least, it would have been one thing if they said, well, we have no idea where. We'll find it when it'll pop up, or when I dream about it, it'll come to me. That's where you would end up saying, okay, you don't need this. They have more concrete information about where they feel that facility will be.
Any further questions?
Am I wrong, or when is it that they need to tell us what the location is?
Through the chair to board member Grimes, at the contract, one of the standard questions in the application is geographic region. And so sometimes an application will simply say Southside, you know, and that actually will pass for that particular section in the application. Then when we get to contract, we put the address of the school into the contract. So we do need to know ultimately where the school's going to be located for the contract. And we also look at, if the application said Southside and they gave us an address near the airport, which is in the north side, we would point out to them that that does not fit within their original approved application.
And the contract is usually done how far?
We usually bring them, it depends how long it takes to negotiate. So we try to get as many as if the school's going to open in the fall, by June. Sometimes if you go to the July meeting, because they all start July 1 of whatever the year is.
As I remember, that was also an issue with opening school last year, right?
Through the chair to board member Grimes, sometimes it is for schools in general. It's to start up anything is difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, you know, a very risky time for any business, is actually being ready to open the door.
The location where they are, where you guys think it might be, where does that fit in the elementary schools that are part of the gap analysis here? Is it closer to one or the other, or in the middle of something?
It's right in the middle of Garden City and Pine Estates, probably half a mile from Garden City and maybe a mile and a half maybe from Pine Estates.
Can I say for the record purposes, and you don't have to take this into this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, she does. For the record. I do, you know, I agree with board member Smith-Juarez's statement that I think in many of the schools, many of the charter schools that we see, the spirit and philosophy of charter is not necessarily there. This school is a public, a Waldorf-inspired educational program. It has very specific educational style. I think it appeals to a very specific culture and family culture. And so I think that that's important in looking at and what the school has to offer to communities around. I know it's their intention to continue their expansion. And when we have many charter schools that come in that do not offer things that are unique or innovative or outside of the realm of what we can offer in our public schools, I think this is one of those that clearly does that.
Any other comments? And just particularly for number 9, just want to be clear that the bringback is that the board be notified at least by the time that it goes public of the superintendent's recommendation, whether to approve or deny. And I believe somewhere in the discussion, I heard a desire for the board to be able to see the diversity plan or what was submitted to the district. Did I hear that right? That people wanted to see that plan?
We all receive the diversity of their current enrollment, understanding that the schools are separate, but I just
Diversity
want
of
to see that
current enrollment, okay, as well. We are on to number 11, which is monthly financial statements, and Board Member Joyce, you had a question?
So, as again, I'm new, so you can help me. But when I was reading through this, when I look under the executive summary and it says all funds, I'm sorry, the general fund, oh wait, I'm sorry, yes. All funds, it said we have an increase 16 million in revenue, and we have increased 43 million, wait, I'm sorry. I'm on page 68.
68, tab number 11.
Yes. So we have increased 16 million in revenues, but at the same time period, we have increased 43 million in expenditures, or let me see, 57% of the budget, and expenditures are 41% of the budget. Hang on, let me grab my thought process here. Okay. Total expenditures for the same period have increased 43 million. So there was a gap in those two numbers. I think it was about $27 million that we were spending more than what we had taken in. So I was concerned about that. I wanted to question that. And then whenever you go over to page 72, and it talks about the budget to actual all funds, that we have received 57% of our expected revenues, and we have we've only spent 41% of what we were expected to spend. So there's just a big difference here, and I just wanted some clarification because it looks like we're in, a situation that could be very detrimental to the district.
Through the chair to Board Member Joyce. Can we go back to page 68?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Bagley, correct me if I say anything incorrect. Is your concern that our general fund expenditures reflect an increase of 16.6 million over last year? Is this at the same time?
Under all funds, our revenues have increased 16 million, but we have also at the same time increased our expenditures at 43 million.
Okay, and the reason we've increased our revenue actually 5 million compared to December of 2017. So we've got an increase of 5 million in December of 2018 versus the same time in 2017. And the reason is our local revenue and Medicaid. That's the reason of that increase. Now, our expenditures have increased 16.6 million December 2018 compared to December 2017. And the main reason is it's related to charter schools. So when charter schools, they are, not only are they spending, but they also got more funding as well for their expenditures. The other thing is also purchase services. And my guess is that's going to be in that department there, transportation, our privatized services. So that's the reason for the increase in expenditures. What you are looking at down at the bottom, revenues are at 61% of the budget. That means we receive 61% of our anticipated funding by December of 2018. The expenditures are at 43% of the budget, meaning we are spending less than what we're bringing in. So 61% of our funding has come into the district as of December 2018. But at the same time, of our budgeted expense in December, we've only spent 43%. So we are under. So I'm trying to get clarification, just so
And I just want to understand.
And
this
Michelle
because
hasn't said anything, so I'm assuming I'm
You need to
still
go
thinking
visit with
correctly.
that lady.
Well, so if you turn to page 72,
72.
and it says all funds,
Yes.
so the revenues that, and I'm assuming, maybe I'm wrong, that this is a budget year from July 1st to June 30th, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
July 1st, 2018 to June 30th,
June
2019.
So from July 1st, so we're halfway through the year,
Mhm.
we have received 57, it says right here, 57% of our revenues.
Yes.
So we're roughly 60% if we want to round up. So we have 40% more that we're going to receive, that we're expected to receive. Expenditures, we've only spent 41% of what we were expected to spend. So we still have to spend 60%. You see where I'm going with this?
Yes.
Okay, so that looks like a delta, a gap, in my opinion. Like we are spending more money than we are receiving. Is that, am I?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No, it's the other ones. We, total expenditures and to date, we spent 41.3% as of December, because now we're in February, so remember this is as of December.
Right.
December 30th would probably put us at the halfway mark of the school year.
Right.
And really, we should have, if every budget item was purchased at the time it's supposed to be purchased and every position filled, this should be more like 50%.
Right.
So we're at 41, so we're a little 8 point something, we're 8 percentage points lower than where if we spent everything. And my guess is most of it is in salaries and employee benefits because we don't have every position hired that was budgeted. And we still have vacancies today. So this is a good thing, the 41.3%. The revenue, we've received 57.1 as of December, and I don't know how that compared, and Michelle, can you tell me how that compared to December 2017? I'm sorry, I just don't have that information.
You're asking about where we were last year?
Yes.
December 2000.
Mhm.
I'll have to look that up. But while I'm looking it up, if I may, Dr. Green,
Yes.
through the chair to...
Use your teacher first.
I'm sorry.
Use your voice.
Through the chair to board member Joyce, this page right here, it is a budget to actual comparison for all funds.
Right.
And so you'll also have to keep in mind that depending on what fund you're talking about, some funds you are meant to spend the fund balance. Like capital, you're not meant to hold on to that, you're supposed to spend that. You're also supposed to spend internal service funds. So this is a compilation of at a very high level of all the funds combined.
Mhm.
So just because you'll see a change in the fund balance as a negative, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You need to look at the breakdown by fund, general fund, debt service, special revenue, capital. So those other funds, a lot of times you are meant to spend the fund balance. And so that's why we break it also down for that.
To add to that, Michelle, if we look at page 73, 73 is budget to actual general fund. So, page 73, if you look at page 73, it matches what you were talking about on page 68. Where it says revenues are at 61.3 of the budget and the expenditures are at 43.5 of the budget. You'll see this page matches exactly what's in that paragraph.
Okay.
And for general fund, again, at December, if every position was filled and every budget item this would be closer to 50%. So this is a positive that we're at 43.5%. Not a positive in that we need teachers, but the budget's not going in a negative direction. That's what I meant. Not positive in that we have vacancies. That's not a positive, but.
I guess my concern is, and if we need to have this conversation somewhere else, that's fine. But we are expected, like, we have budgeted 1.62. Well, you see, we budgeted, this is how much money we're supposed to spend this year.
Yes.
We've only spent 43% of that money, but we've taken in more money revenue-wise so we're not at 50-50.
That is correct.
So if we only get 40% more, we're not going to have enough money to spend 60% more. Am I?
So can I, Madam Chair, I'm sorry.
Do you see
What about, do you want to sit down with, Michelle can clarify all of this? And, it's, being a billion-dollar operation, it's.
Well, I guess I just look at it, I'm going to be very simple. If I know that I'm going to make, 100% of my income, and I've taken in 60% of my income already, but I've only spent 40% of it, at the end of the year, there's going to be an issue.
Say that. Oh, through the chair to Ms. Board Member Joyce. When most of our revenue, especially our local revenue, the bulk of it comes November, December. That's when the tax notices go out and people pay those people who pay their taxes on time. That's where we're getting the bulk of our local revenue. So it front ends most of it. I don't want to say front end because our year started in July, but that's the window where the bulk of it's going to come in and show up. And then you'll get the remaining of it month by month. It'll decrease because most of it's been sent in those 2 months. For expenditures, one, they are pretty much, I want to say constant, because if you are a teacher and we pay you $50,000, the paycheck is divided up under 26. It's not going to increase. So the rate of spending for the expenditures are more constant. So you can project, we're going to keep doing this. Anything large ticket items that we have budgeted, more than likely, are front-ended, because if we think students need it, you don't wait till January to buy unless you are trying to do something for the upcoming year. Those expenditures have already been made. And so that's why you will see the budget at December, boom, look like you, and the expenditures are more going to be consistent. This, where the budget, a bulk of it comes in December, and you're going to start to see it slow down because by the time we get to June, most of the local revenue has come in. Now, for state revenue, we just finished Survey 3. And the late April, we will get our fourth calc. And that's when the state pays us again. And then you'll see another bump again in April or change. It just depends on our student enrollment for that survey period. So I hope I'm explaining it. The expenditures are the constant. That's something we can, it is the revenue that there are certain times during our fiscal year, you start to see there's more money. If you looked at the statements prior to December, you would have seen us in the negative, because we hadn't received our funding for our local taxes. But we would be more than happy to let Michelle sit down. I hope to try to explain it, but the expenditures are something that is much more constant. We budgeted for how much we pay our employees, and that's why their paychecks are in 26. So it's 126, 126, 120. We already know how to anticipate those expenditures. If you also go back and look at your dashboard, we are tracking it through the dashboard as well. Ms. Bagley and I just met yesterday and went through the dashboard, and you can see where the schools are, where the district is in the expenditures related to what makes up that 43.5%.
But we are expected to spend under the 2018-19, that whole amount. We are expected to spend that whole amount, nothing in reserves. Under
Are you talking about
expenditures.
total expenditures?
Yes.
The 1,062,000,000?
Yes.
I won't say that we're going to spend
Okay.
all of that, because again, when you look at, this is the current budget and this is actual to date, you'll see that salaries, the budget, we budgeted 479 million, you see that number, and to date we spent 227 million. Again, it is not at 50, it's at 47.6. That tells you, well, you didn't have all your positions, weren't all filled, people leave, you hire new people. So based on that number, I would project that we're not going to spend all of the dollars that were budgeted for salaries. And
Thanks. I just wanted to tag on to what the superintendent just said. So there were a couple of years where the board was anticipating lap salary, and at the recommendation of the superintendent and budget staff, we went ahead and allocated some of those dollars and anticipated recapture, because we know that in an organization as large as ours, you're going to have some movement. Michelle, you can nod or shake your head, but best practice, as we were then told by our auditor, who's now our CFO, and given the financial situation we found ourselves in, which we could only see in arrears, we couldn't see coming, we then budgeted according to actuals without anticipation of lapse. Even though we knew there would be some lapse salary, but we couldn't predict exactly what or how much, and we wanted to know that we were budgeting based on the salaries that we were allocating. And so that's what we're now seeing in some of these numbers, is the best practice for budgeting, which is to move forward and budget for the positions groupings, not for the anticipation of filling those positions. And so some of the recapture that happens through those lapse salary will also go to return to the reserves what was loaned. That's my term, not the technical financial term. Out of our reserves, so that we can restore the 5%.
Okay.
And we're required by the state to have 3%, but this board made a decision, and previous boards made the decision, it's been renewed to keep ours at 5%. Board Member Grimes, being the most senior person on the board in years of experience, did you want to add to anything that Board Member Smith-Juarez said?
No. She knows it much better than I do.
I don't know about
So,
that.
yeah.
Board Member Anderson, you had a question?
Oh, I did have a quick question, and this may be tiptoeing into tab 12 a bit, but when we look at amending the budget, the present budget column,
Are you in 12? No? Can we stay in 11? We're gonna go to 12.
well, it's coming back to
Okay,
11.
all right.
It kind of bridges that. The present budget, or excuse me, the revised budget column then becomes the present budget column moving forward. That's my understanding.
Yes.
And so when we're looking at page 72 at the 2018 current budget, does that column represent the current budget based on monthly revisions, or the current budget based on what happened in early 2018, last year? Does that make sense?
I think I know the answer, but I'm gonna defer to Ms. Bagley because I'd rather it be right the first time.
Through the chair, Board Member Anderson, since this is the December monthly financial report, the budget that you are seeing is the budget that the board approved that was effective for December. And so on the cover of the document, it'll say District Budget Resolution approved February 5th, 2019. And if you go back to that regular board meeting, I believe that budget resolution was through December 31st.
Thank you all for being patient and kind, and since we're new and working through all of this. I do have one more question. When I'm looking at page 73, I know that we talked about salaries under expenditures, and it was, I understand that we haven't filled all the positions, so therefore we're not at the 50%. But when we look at materials and supplies, that we've spent 22% of what we've actually budgeted, are we expected to spend the whole 72 million? Or is that something that also, if the funds aren't there, we're not going to spend what we have budgeted?
Through the chair to Board Member Joyce. That's a yes and no answer. It depends on what are the POs out there. Right now, it says we've only expended 22, but there may have been POs set out there to not execute until January. So this is December. I assure you, we spent more than 22.5 since that time. But what Michelle and I were doing yesterday is to say, let's go out there and see, here's budget that says we were supposed to spend it on material and supplies, but let's look at the departments, let's look. If you haven't bought it by now, is it something that we actually really need? And that's why we've been working with the departments to say, go back and look at your budget, what's remaining, and look at what would your budget look like if you only spent to 90% of that budget. However, anything impacting students is very important to me anyway, and to the board, that we would be asking the questions, why haven't you, if we said this was important, why haven't you bought it? Why haven't you, and there may be a plethora of reasons why. Well, they indicated if we purchase it at this time, it's at a certain discount, or we made a budget amendment and we went into a different direction. But that is what we do starting at this point. We start looking at these different categories each month to say, where are we? To one, that is what I said to the board when I first came on, that this every 6 weeks I meet with Ms. Bagley and we go through and we look at the dashboard, or I ask, can you tell me where this particular department is on their spending, and from what I see they still have this amount left over. Or just like going through my own budget, I see I have something in a particular category and I'm thinking, okay, I'm not gonna spend that this year. So we review this to, even though it says we have 72 million, we review it now every 6 weeks to say, are we really gonna spend all 72 million? And if we're not, then make sure that we don't touch that, or make sure that we have a plan of upcoming budget. If we didn't spend it, why is it budgeted? And why do we need it? Or how do we make sure we revise this for next year's upcoming budget?
And
So we're always looking back and looking forward at the same time.
And it, you know, as working in a school with a budget, I know a lot of times you have a certain amount budgeted, and then you don't spend it, and at the end of the year, everybody's kind of scrambling to get that money spent because it's in the budget. We can spend this money, it's been budgeted for us. But my concern is if you're only at 22%, we've already exceeded more than 50% of our revenues, we might not have that money there for them to spend. But I can talk to Michelle about this, because, yeah.
Board Member Smith, Boris, you had a, ask that question.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna hold it till, governance, but, when are we, to the chair, when are we gonna start the budgeting process for 1920? In terms of
Through the chair, when legislation, at least we get another budget other than the governor's. We have not received the House budget, we've not received the Senate's budget, one that we can have fair use. Now, this be my first one with Duval, but normally I wouldn't start until I had 3 different budgets to look at and say, how do we figure out what would be more closely aligned? But I believe that Ms. Young we've started mapping out when should we start having the budget meetings. But I think it's more April, May.
Okay. Thank you for opening this door, because I don't know that I've had a conversation with our current superintendent. So, in my opinion, and what we have been able to do in some years, not all, I'll be fair, but in some years is to begin to look at budgeting forward. We're really the only $1.6 billion business that I know of, other than school districts across the state, that budget annually based on outside income streams that we can't control. And so I think to the degree that we can, and I say that because, you know, most organizations that are this large would have budgets out multiple years and have projections and opportunities and that kind of thing. We just live in such an unstable, volatile funding environment that we do find ourselves in sort of this, well, let's see what's coming, and then we'll, you know, kind of allocate that out. So to the degree that we are able, I do think that it is advantageous for us to look at what would we do and what do we need to maintain a level of service and even grow in areas that we know are critically important to achieving our mission and vision of having students inspired and prepared for college or career in life, so that as we're moving through the legislative process, that we can, and our constituents can, have those conversations with legislators to say, this is what we need to continue to deliver and even expand our delivery of services to students, so that it's less about us catching what comes to us and then making decisions that involve cuts and other things that then fall on our shoulders when we just don't have the revenue stream that comes in. So I think if we can have those conversations proactively, and if we have some of that data and understanding from staff, then it's a shared obligation between the state and the local school districts to provide what is in the very beginning of our state constitution in terms of free, open access, and high-quality public education to our constituents. So thank you for allowing me to repeat myself again. But I do think that it's a good opportunity for us to be able to have some forward-thinking conversations, even if it's just on an annual basis. So any information that could be provided in advance of us understanding what may eventually be passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, I think would be helpful to how we move through the budgeting process.
Any other comments? We are on to number 12, Vice Chair Jones. The adoption of budget resolutions for the year 2019.
Just having one quick question. Page 93. Page 93, item 12. Receipt of safety of security of school buildings grant. Is that the grant? We received that funding for that grant, I assume.
Through the chair, yes, sir.
This is the one with the metal detectors
Yes, sir.
and cameras.
That's right.
What is the anticipation of them being installed?
Through the chair to Board Member Jones, the cameras is a two-part funding source. For the high schools, we are using our current capital dollars. So those cameras are being installed as we speak. This grant was to help support middle and elementary. So this would start after we've completed all the high schools. So it would probably be more towards the summer that we would start supporting the middle schools and elementary schools.
Thank you.
Any other questions on 12 before we get it? We're on 16, nonprofit school food service management company. Board Member Willie, any question for 16?
Okay, this is about the food service contract. So this is the big contract that came up. I just wanted to give a quick voiceover of where we are. This is Chartwell's renewing the contract, correct? It's either to you or to the facility.
Through the chair, this is not a renew. It was a complete process.
Right.
So I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
But yes, to what this is an RFP that went out and Chartwell's is the entity that won the bid and we're recommended.
And one other question, the financial impact, I think last year it said it was 48 and then it went up to 49. I'm assuming that's just normal inflation and whatnot that happens within that certain parameter.
To the chair, to Board Member Willie, that would be my assumption, but I am going to ask Paul Sorth.
That's correct. Yeah, it's due to the new contract pricing, to the chair, to Board Member. It's due to the new contract pricing. Also due to the fact that when we put the contract out, we list roughly 25 district employees that we tell the contractor that these people will be there, they're going to provide food service for you. We have, that list is put together back when the contract first goes out. So it goes back to July, June of last summer. By the time the contract starts, it's been over a year. Some of those people will have retired or left. So he has the right to replace them, and we will provide additional money for that as well. So those factors coming together, it will cause it to be roughly, we're estimating $1 million higher.
Any further questions?
No, that's it. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Oh, no, go ahead. I was a little confused, I guess, because of I was confused, is this, so Chartwell's, so they will continue, right?
To the chair, please.
So I guess this nonprofit school food service management company, so what is that? It's under the recommendation. Yeah. Yeah, I think it was maybe just
Through the chair, I think we can double check. That's simply the name of the solicitation, the title, for RFP number 02-19/LM. So we'll just double check.
That's correct. That's the name that we give to the RFP.
Is that always the case? Have we been doing that? The nonprofit thing
Sure.
is what.
Yeah, through the chair, I'm not certain, I can't remember prior years, but we typically take the name right off of the RFP and put it into the agenda item.
Okay.
Exact
Yep.
number and all.
But basically, Chartwell's will be the contractor, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Vice Chair Jones?
Sure. Thank you. I just was curious. We only had 2 respondents to the RFP.
The chair, the board member, yes, sir. We did. We expected to be more, but you have to remember the contract value is over 50+ million. So to put together the actual proposal can cost several $100,000. So we had interest, but the actual firms that will go together and actually do the formal preparation and submit the proposal, that's a big step, and not all the firms will take it, even though they're interested.
I was just truly surprised that we only had 2 that responded, given the size of the contract. Opportunity to drive some of those prices down with more competition.
Just a quick clarifying question. I noticed on the financial impact section on page 125 that it notes additional sales to the Kids Hope Alliance programs. Is that covered in, is that our cost? They reimburse for those food service programs?
Okay. You want to answer it, Chair?
To the chair, board member Anderson, no, they actually, we do the food service management company contract is the large contract, and then separate smaller agreements are issued and are funded by the city of Jackson based on their fiscal year.
Thank you.
Any further discussion or comments? We are on to number 20, board member Grimes.
This is just a silly question, I think. Is it 20?
You said 20, page 175.
What's this?
What you said. No.
I'm actually looking for substitute
Yeah, she did,
teachers.
but I was calling on board member Grimes.
No, I was just letting it.
Oh, okay.
I'm
You said it
looking
was
for
page
super-
175.
I'm looking for,
I said it was 175.
Okay.
Sure. Was the page.
yes, okay. So this is probably a really stupid question, but so one of the substitute criteria is that they be at least 18 years of age. Is it possible we would have somebody at 18 be substitutes without any real knowledge?
To the chair, to board member Grimes, yes, as long as they have 60 college credit hours. And yeah.
Graduating
Yes.
without.
Okay. I was just curious. I know I couldn't have taught anything when I was 18, but I can't do it either.
Board member Anderson, you had a question about number 20 as well.
Yeah.
I don't think I read 20, just for the record, I'll go back and read that. I just kind of jumped into that. That is public hearing and vote revisions to chapter 6 board policies.
I had a couple of them circled, so I'm just kind of looking back to my notes. I have number 183, absence without leave, circles and I don't think that's what I meant to. I think I was supposed to be 658, which is family medical leave. 184. I was just wondering whether or not this policy had been, if this is the finalized version, as follow-up from our previous conversation about FMLA and whether or not there were any other changes based on the subcommittee review. Is it the same policy?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to ask Ms. Young to address that question.
For the Chair to Board Member Anderson, this is the final recommended language. So there was extensive conversation regarding placement procedures. Actually, there were two issues. The first being placement procedures, which if the board approves the recommended changes, there would have to be some subsequent negotiations in terms of placement. And then there were also conversations about perhaps making this permissive instead of required in terms of the employee having the option of utilizing their accrued leave prior to or after, after taking unpaid FMLA. That is an option. That's something that is allowable. However, the recommendation, even having heard the conversation at the workshops, prior workshops, is that the board's language align with one, what is allowed under federal law, which is the concurrent, what is consistent with like-sized districts, which is the concurrent, and then most recently in learning that because this conversation has been going on for several years, in practice, the district staff that actually manage this have actually for some time been managing the process based on what the recommended language is. So there were conversations about possible revisions that could be made, but it is the superintendent's recommendation based on staff's review that it be required concurrently and not permissive. But again, to be clear, it is an option that the district could have the leave be permissive, meaning the employee would have the option or not have the option of utilizing their accrued leave after taking the non-paid FMLA leave. Question.
I just want to clarify, Ms. Justine, is this the one we talked about that had to do more with
Turnaround schools and placement, or?
Yeah, I believe that we have a conversation about the.
If I may, and I think through the chair to Ms. Anderson and to the board, I think Ms. Young touched upon that. I do recall one of the questions that was asked was the practice of returning a returning employee to the same position. And I think Ms. Young, she said it, but I want to elaborate. I believe we do that because it's the language in our collective bargaining agreement. So we're following the collective bargaining agreement that we negotiated, as opposed to a returning employee returning to the same position, but that same position could be in other locations. Was that the question that you had? Where does the returning employee return to? Presently, it's the same spot.
But my thing was just, what, in a conversation that you and I had, you said this was more collective bargaining.
Yes, ma'am.
Versus something that the board determines, this is what we want it to be. This is something that is a result of collective bargaining, therefore the conversation is a little different.
Yes, ma'am.
Than us creating a policy, if that was my understanding from our conversation.
Yes, ma'am. Presently, your collective bargaining agreement language talks about returning the employee to the same spot. Therefore, you can't change it really in policy and implement it, because you have to implement your specific contract.
Okay, so my question or concern about this particular policy, as I've shared with Ms. Young, is less about placement and more about time. And so, thinking about the collective bargaining, I'm wondering, my thought or my recommendation was to allow the employee to opt, right, to be able to save leave time, taking their FMLA, some portion of that, if not all of it, I don't know what's required by law, unpaid, and then allowing them to opt, if they'd like, to add on leave time at the end of their FMLA which may or may not result in a placement change. So I'm wondering, but that would be their option to choose to take that extended leave. I'm wondering if, based on collective bargaining, if they were out for FMLA, they took their 90 days, and then opted to take another 2 weeks, let's just say, for saying's sake. Does the principal have the authority at the end of that 90 days to fill the position, or based on collective bargaining, do they not?
So, currently or as proposed?
Neither.
Okay.
If we were to make it optional rather than required.
So if we make it optional rather than required, the proposed language would allow what federally is currently allowed, which is at the end of the protected period of time, the FMLA period, that the employee returns to a comparable position. Comparable position, not the exact same seat by which they left. Now, the reason, and we continue to go back to the collective bargaining agreement, is because that can look very differently. For example, if we were to negotiate that if that seat were available, that the employee returns, then under the contract, even though under law, we would have the right to place in some other comparable seat, by negotiating that, they would be able to return to that identical seat. So we continue to go back to the placement really depends on what is negotiated. If that language weren't negotiated, then there wouldn't be a right to return to that specific position. But under federal law, after the protected leave period has expired, the employee returns. We must guarantee the right to return to a comparable position.
Right.
We would negotiate what that looks like, whether that's an identical seat, whether that's within the same region, whether the employee has the right to submit, indicators. We have placements procedures in place for many different circumstances currently, and so we would negotiate what that looks like.
On an individual basis.
On a collective basis, but based perhaps on individual circumstances. Like, we wouldn't be able to negotiate every single identical matter, but we could, for example, and I'm throwing out things that other districts do. So I mean, these are actual practices that are in place. It could be where the seat remains currently vacant, the employee has the right to return. Again, even if by federal law we could place them somewhere else, we've negotiated if that seat is vacant and the person has a certification to go into that seat, they get to return to the seat. We could negotiate they have the opportunity to return to the region that they left, if that's their desire. So there are many different ways that we can resolve the issue of where they return. Once we have a defined policy as to what happens, whether they're taking their accrued leave concurrently, or whether or not they have the option to take that FMLA as unpaid, even if they have leave in place.
I still think that it would be my preference to allow them to take leave after their FMLA. I understand the need to be able to fill positions to make sure that, especially our turnaround schools, there are certified teachers in place to educate our children. And as a parent, I can imagine the frustration at having a classroom teacher absent for months and months of the school year. Also, as a parent and a former teacher, I know that the option to have that extended leave is something that many families planned, specifically things like maternity leave around, and really enjoyed the benefit of the extended time with their small child. We know that it may not be federally mandated that we require or allow for extended maternity leave, but I definitely think that's been a benefit to the staff in this district, and it's something that I think is good for children and good for mothers, good for families, good for communities, and so I would like to see the language allow for teachers who choose to take extended time after their FMLA to be allowed to do so.
Does that require going back to collective bargaining negotiation?
Not the policy change. The thing that has to be bargained is the placement procedure, which is not what Ms. Anderson
Okay.
is speaking to. Because whether they take the leave concurrently or whether they take their leave after the unpaid leave, after the protected period, that's what's negotiated in terms of placement. So that would not change, and she and I have had that conversation. So the only issue that I think is being raised in her comments are whether or not the employee is required to take their accrued leave at the time that their FMLA starts, or whether we give the option to the employee to take unpaid leave first and then essentially bank their leave and decide whether or not they want to take it or not. That is the issue that Ms. Anderson, if I'm understanding correctly.
But then that does not restrict a principal's ability to replace a teacher after the protected period of time for the sake of student achievement.
Correct. It would not. The principal still, at the end of that protected FMLA time, has the ability to assign personnel, again, subject to placement negotiations, which could say, you know, so if the employee returns on the last day of their protected leave, or they exhaust their protected leave, they have the right to go back to that position. But if they decide that they want to take additional time, which again is what Ms. Anderson is addressing, which was not discussed substantively at the subcommittee meeting, then the recognition is that whatever is in place would apply. She's simply, and I say simply, but she is addressing the issue of, do we require the concurrent use of leave, or do we make it permissive so that the employee has the option to either run it concurrently or not run it concurrently? And the example that we discussed is if an employee has the ability to take unpaid leave, should the district require that employee to use their leave?
So what in the language of this, and for the sake of time, what would that language and thank you, board member Flores. What would that language look like so that we can get a clear thing on what we were discussing and deciding on?
Yes, ma'am. So it would look something like employees who have accrued paid leave may utilize their may utilize. Right, it's a may. The employees who have accrued paid leave may take FMLA as unpaid leave, or may concurrently run all accrued paid leave with their available FMLA leave. Something along those lines. It would be cleaned up a little bit, but.
If I may, Madam Chairman, if we are changing, because this is the purpose of bringing this policy to be amended, we would need to re-advertise it and move it to May. This isn't a simple wordsmithing. It would be just so that you are aware, of the timing. The content is important, but I just want you to be aware of the timing.
How does that impact, how would this policy, does delaying approval of the policy as presently presented impact any collective bargaining or anything like that for next year? If it's gonna be, if it's a bring back, what are the consequences for a delay, I guess is the bigger question.
To the board through the chair. So the proposed language, again, as currently submitted, is doing a few things. One, aligning with what is allowing with like-size district and our current practice, having also discovered that our current practice. So a delay we would continue to operate as we're operating. If the board approves the amended revision, again, a cleaner version of what I just attempted to articulate, but for it to be permissive, it would mean that after the approval, the employee would have the option of not taking their leave until the employee would have that option. we would still, after the approval, negotiate that placement. I'm looking to Ms. Brady only because she's seated here. We would still negotiate that placement process. But I don't see that there would be a significant change in practice from what we're currently doing. Again, if the board directs us to go back and to make this permissive, we'll work with Ms. Chastain, we'll notice that language. It is the recommendation, however, that currently, that we move forward with the concurrent leave. But hearing very loudly Board Member Anderson, and if it's the will of the board for us to go back and make that amendment, then we'll do that.
Let me just, would this have to be discussed again at a policy meeting, or would it just be brought back up as an agenda?
It would be brought, if, it depends on what the board directs. If the board directs us to make the change so that it's permissive, we will simply work with Ms. Chastain, we'll advertise it when it's appropriate to bring to the next agenda review, we'll bring the revised language. But if the board says, well, we want to have some more conversation around it, then we would bring it back to the next policy. So.
Okay. And just before we get into that, and Vice Chair Jones would like to speak, is that the superintendent and I met yesterday, and spring break is in March. So we moved our meeting that we had for the 12th, just want to put that out there. And we also adjusted due to scheduling for some of the superintendent's requirements and conflicts. We moved from the March 19th to March 20th. We slid that meeting over a day. And so doing that that bumps the policy meeting. So just want to put that out there that this would not be, it could be, but if it was brought back to a policy meeting, that's kind of been bumped in March. Just wanted to put that out there. But Vice Chair Jones, what would you like to add to this conversation?
No, I was just wondering if it would, going back to your original question, it doesn't impact what happens going forward, because the policy change would become effective next school year. Is that correct?
So, I'm sorry, to Board Member Jones through the chair, the policy would be effective upon approval by the board. And then we would, once the policy changes, and then again, Ms. Brady's sitting here, and we've had conversations about this change for several years. This is not a new topic, and there were reasons on both sides, the district side and the employee side, that brought us to the recommendation. But the union would then impact bargain the change of the impact of the policy on the working conditions, which again, that really looks at the placement process.
And to be clear, the amended or revised version would allow the employee to hold off using their leave until they've exhausted the FMLA.
Yes, sir, it would. It would satisfy.
With that, the principal at the end of the use of the FMLA could then fill that position.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we're not having a negative impact on those students who have had to endure a sub or.
No, sir.
Okay.
So the proposed revision would not affect at all the issue that was the reason that we brought the policy to the board originally, which was the duration of time that the school had a vacancy, which adversely, in many cases, impacted, we believe, the ability to get a full-time person in that spot.
And given that, I think that's a good compromise. It protects, it gives more flexibility to our parents, but it also provides the principal opportunity to fill that position if he or she desires, so you don't negatively impact the performance of the student, especially in turnaround schools where we have the biggest problem. Thank you.
Any further comments?
Yeah, I agree with the conversation. I would be fine moving forward with the change, and I think the time delay it doesn't sound like is a big issue. I just want to make sure
that we are defining and discussing parental leave. I know maternity has been mentioned a few times in the conversation, and for whatever reason, federal law still defines childbirth as a disability.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that we're discussing a broad definition of parental leave as defined in this policy, and that we're not isolating a particular type of parenthood. But I'm getting nods.
Yes,
so.
through the chair to Ms. Flores, we're defining a broad availability of protected family and medical leave, not just a specific. The example was one specific example.
Sure.
That is allowed under the broad policy.
Okay.
Board Member William, you had a comment?
No.
So, based upon my understanding, then, this will go back for revision, be presented to Ms. Chastain, and then brought back to the board at a future date. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, and to add to that, I will send in an advertisement, a notice of change that 6.58, this policy will not have a public hearing at your March 5th meeting. And the agenda item obviously would be revised to remove the references to in the text of the agenda item and remove it from the attachment.
Okay. We are on to 22, public hearing and vote revisions to Chapter 8 board policies. And that specific policy is 8.59, naming or renaming schools or school facilities for members of this.
I don't have a specific question regarding the renaming of the school and the policy that we are going to approve. But I did want to bring up, I have, and this is through the chair, Dr. Green, I have a school in my district, Ed White, who was a White Military Academy of Leadership. And I think at some point they have changed the name of their school. And I know I've brought this before you before. And the response that I received was that name change was not approved and that did not happen. It is still Ed White Military Academy of Leadership. However, on the website, on the social media platform, in every publication, it's Ed White High School. And even the district, with my community meeting, when we put that out, and I did it at Ed White, I said Ed White High School. And we wouldn't call Douglas Anderson High School. It's Douglas Anderson School of the Arts. And Paxson is not Paxson High School, it's Paxson School for Advanced Studies. So I just want to know specifically, what is the name of the school? If there was a change, how did that process happen? And if it's not, if it's still if the name is still Military Academy of Leadership, what are we doing to make sure that that is conveyed to the community? Because I don't feel like that it is being conveyed to the communities. And I've heard students at the school, they work at the grocery store that I shop at, and when I check out, they say it's not Military Academy of Leadership. I've heard other principals say that military has been removed from the name. So if that's the case, I just want to know what the process was to remove the name military from the name of the school.
Through the chair to Board Member Joyce, they have not, they may have changed the name and the way they talk about the school, but it has not gone to official name change. It has not been brought, we have no evidence that it has been brought to the board. The principal has, a conversation has been had with the principal. The principal indicates that the staff is going to come before the board requesting a name change, but to date, that has not happened, and the principal does know, well, you can't refer it to just Leadership Academy because the official name is Ed White High School, Military Leadership Academy.
Thank you.
But the regional superintendent will follow up again. That
If there's a
conversation
process
has
in
been.
place, I just want to make sure we're following that process.
Can I actually ask to you, I guess, so are they still doing the academy?
Well, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that we are still, I visited the school a few weeks ago, so I feel like we still have those two programs. There's a military leadership component to the program with the ROTC component. So I think that it's still there. Looks like that it's still there to me. But just the, word military has been removed from the name. I think that the uniform policy has been downgraded, so it's not as stringent as it was. And my understanding is that there was a principal change. The new principal did not want military in the name, and she didn't want the uniform policy to be as stringent as it was, and so therefore she changed the policy and she's changed the name of the school. And I just wanted to bring up before the superintendent and the district, based on just the principal's authority, or was there a process put in place for this to happen?
Right. And to your question, there wasn't a process in place. It was that the principal that came in changed it. So I guess in reality, it really, I don't know. If it's just Ed White, or is it?
Is it still a themed magnet school?
Through the chair to the board, Dr. Krisner has just shared with me the MSID number states it is only Ed White High School. So, by the state of Florida, that is the name of the school. So, there's been no evidence, there's no evidence that the name changed, but we now need to go back to the state of Florida because the MSID number says it's Ed White High School.
And with that, Stillwell, when we changed the name through the board, and the board changed the name to Stillwell Military Academy of Leadership, but if you look at that number, the MSI number, it is still Stillwell, Joseph Stillwell Middle School. So I know that I brought that, the state recognizes the name of the school one way, the district approved, or the board approved the name of the school a different way. So that doesn't correlate either.
So Stillwell, I can't remember if we did an official.
Stillwell is still Stillwell.
Yeah, I can't remember the details of it, but I do, and maybe we can ask the staff go back and track and report back to the board. But when we went through the ACE process and the magnets were changed and that kind of thing, there was a process by which the magnet, the designation, the attendance zone, all of that is changed, and then there's the application to the state for a new school number, a new school name, and I believe there was a difference between some of what was on the board agenda items and how those things went forward, but it's been several years. And I can't remember all the details, so I think it might just be useful, rather than trying to dig back through all of that right now, to just ask maybe that staff kind of give us history.
Well, and so, we've already asked for the workshop on charter schools, and we have asked for the bring back on number 20 with the medical leave with the revision reviewed by Ms. Chastain. So adding to that an update on information regarding approved name changes by the board and the correlation follow-up with the state to make sure that what was approved by the board is then recognized by the state, and identify any schools where there's a gap. Is that correct?
Yes, but I think we also need to know, is the gap on our end?
Right.
Or is it on the application in the state's end? And I think there was some discussion about that, I just can't remember exactly how
It
that
makes
all
me
shook
wonder
out.
about the other,
Other changes, did we follow through, did we do our due diligence to make sure that those name changes at the district level are reflected at the state level?
And
individuals.
I bring it up because the concern for me is that there was a lot of work put in place to create the program at Justice Stillwell Military Academy of Leadership. There was a lot of work put in place to create Ed White Military Academy of Leadership. My concern is that if you appoint a principal who doesn't have that military background, doesn't understand the importance of the structure and the high level of accountability, and decides that, I don't really like this program, so I'm going to convince everybody we're just going to take the name away and we'll create a different program. So I feel like there's a danger in, change of leadership just changes programs. And there's too many people involved, and the students are involved, and they signed up to go to for this program. So I really want to make sure that this is being addressed properly.
And it appears that the board previously, if I remember, Smith Rose and Warner Grimes were on the board then, it sounds like the discussion at that time of the board was continuity, having a middle school feed into a high school with program continuity, and then there's a question now of if that is actually happening. Is that?
Well, and I think also the issue of, at the time at White, I think it was, I don't know if it was Stillwell or at White, they had the perfect principal. So that, it definitely shouldn't be just a principal coming in and deciding no and not telling anybody.
So I'm sure Dr. Graham will address that.
Well, through the chair, I do want to caution, perfect doesn't mean, that principal is at a different school. They may have a different thought of whether they have a perfect principal. So I just didn't want to get into, we're saying now that other principal is not perfect. I've spoken to Ms. Baptiste and the principal at Stillwell, and her name is just not coming to my head right now. And that, yes, Principal Wilcox. And Principal Wilcox is working on a plan to ensure that they are in line with their military academy. For Ed White, the principal is indicating many high school students, it's been hard for them to recruit under the word military, and that they are struggling with just that one word, military, and that they feel that they would be better served dropping the word military and making it leadership academy, and that they still will be a part of the uniforms. The uniforms will still be a part of the magnets, but that is what the principal is indicating at Ed White High School. And I've shared with the principal, but until the board change, your SAC first has to come forward and request for the name change. Then the board has to decide whether they are going to approve that name change, and you need to follow the process. Like Mayport Middle School wanted to change their name. They followed the process by getting their SAC and then coming before the board.
One comment. From I think our standpoint, and I don't know what our process is, and maybe this is something that we can address another time, but ensuring that whatever programs are put in place at a school are followed through with some fidelity so that we can be true to our branding, I think is important from, a umbrella perspective of communications and marketing and, business standpoint, because, we are a district that embraces choice, and in order for our constituents and our children to make really informed decisions about where they want to go to school, making sure that we have somebody that's going in to review these programs, and I believe Dr. Cooper Daniels does that to some degree. I don't know for sure, but that is something that we're looking at all the time to make sure that those programs are there, that we are delivering what we say we're delivering. I know I've been into some of my schools recently, and they say, oh, well, we are supposed to be a visual arts, something. Well, there's really nothing in place that's supporting that program. And I don't want it to be a misnomer that we are, you know, selling something to somebody that they're not going to get. We're just going to end up in hot water, you know. I don't want to be doing that across the board.
Through the chair, Dr. Kelly Coker Daniels looks at our CTE academies.
Okay.
It is through Ms. Peak's office for magnet programs. So I just want to clarify, Ms. Peak's office is the office that evaluates the magnet programs. They're also the entity that tells, oh, you're not meeting your magnet. You have X amount of time to get in compliance with your magnet, or we actually send to you, we're recommending taking these schools off your, I think we sent a list maybe a couple months ago. Then and then I think a school can come back and say, oh, we'll get our act together, please don't take us off the list. And we've had one school ask, can you give us one more year to work on our magnet? So that is how the process works. And so if I've left something out, Ms. Peak, you can add anything to it.
Through the chair to Board Member Anderson, we have multiple types of choices, and I think it's understanding the choice, why we have that choice in place, and every school in our district has a special program, whether it's a dedicated magnet, program within a school, special attractor, which is special transfer option. As Dr. Green said, we have CTE programs, and yes, we will do a much better job at making certain that parents understand the type of program, what that access is, and Dr. Coker Daniel and I work very, very closely together. So as we continue to make that reference guide, a point of contact for parents and the school's websites and the information that we put out through communications with Dr. Pierce, we're just clarifying and making things a little more understandable for all of our constituents. But they're different points of access and different types of programs and different entities that actually evaluate the success or
So we're reviewing the magnet programs regularly, but the rest of the sort of special choice type programs, does somebody go in and look at that?
well,
I'm just curious.
in my short tenure, we've cleaned up the process for looking at magnet to continue a program or discontinue. There was a lot of conversation that we're still having around the programs that are in the schools that are non-magnet for the special transfer option. So I will speak to that as we have a little more clarity, because principals do go in and they have so many other things to think about. Oh, and then by the way, you have this program. So as we work with our leadership, we will be able to better clarify for you how that looks and what it looks like when you're looking at the leadership for the school with the program.
Sure, I do think that should be a priority for us, so thank you for that.
Thank you, and I realize I'm maybe taking us further down the rabbit hole and not quite back to this policy for a second, but if you'll indulge me.
You just whisker that part?
Right. I will say that I think that this conversation is really productive and warranted, and I have had some ongoing questions based on some of the changes that were made now. You know, the schools have a couple of years under their belts in terms of recruitment and program implementation and that type of thing. And at least from my perspective, there were quite a few conversations. Board Member Jones alluded to continuity. There were quite a few motivating factors and reasons for a lot of these changes. For me, a significant issue was looking at the current enrollment of the schools and the neighborhood subscription, so to speak, and were we really providing something that students in the attendance zone wanted from their schools. I think the new age of magnets, not where they were originally created, but our new age of magnets, should be providing something, a choice for those students who are surrounding their school, because we saw that many of our students were choosing places that put them on a bus for long periods of time, and out of their communities. And so I really think that it would be beneficial and helpful for us to look at with these new magnets and all of our magnets maybe, what is the school composition? If some of these have been, we listened to the ACE committees and that kind of thing, if some of the recommendations have been problematic in terms of recruitment, or in terms of, if we haven't seen the response from constituencies that were expected, I think we need to ask those tough questions of ourselves. And are we really providing something that is more desirable or not? And how have we, followed up on those things? So while I appreciate that this is more specific to the branding piece, and I think Board Member Anderson brings up a good point, we don't want to say through the name that we're offering one thing and really there's another thing in the building. But we need to know, are they aligned to what folks are looking for, and what we can offer? This is actually the one where I said I would follow up with a couple of questions offline, rather than ask them here. But I think now that we've had some significant conversation, that it makes sense. So 1A or A1 on page 199 refers to the main portion of the name of a school. I know we have really sought, as we've gone through all of these policy reviews and policy changes, to be as specific and particular as possible. And I'm not really clear on what main portion means here. So, can someone help me? I mean, is main portion Military Leadership Academy? Because that defines what the school does.
Or is it, or is it Ed White?
Yeah.
Because that's
Through the chair to Board Member Smith Juarez, main portion means the name of the school. So in Mayport Middle School, the main portion is Mayport Middle School. You cannot, that would not be an adjustment. You are changing the name of the school. So the adjustment means whatever the original main name of the school currently is, you cannot, for adjustment for this portion of the policy, you cannot change that. So Mayport Middle wants to be called Mayport Coastal Science Middle School. So Mayport Middle is still intact. They're just adding Coastal Science to its name.
Got it. So we're really,
in Ed White's case, if the name of Ed White has to stay if it was under this particular name adjustment.
so really what we're talking about here is not the main portion of the name, but the existing name.
Just quickly, my concern is let's go down for devil's advocate purposes and say Ed White Middle School or Ed White High School was changed in the state system, and it was Ed White Military Leadership High School or Academy, and now they want to come back and do a name adjustment back to Ed White High School. But if we were adjusting back because the program is gone, or because the programming hasn't been followed through, or because of whatever reason, if we're adjusting back in the future, is there too much leeway or discretion for main portion to be interpreted?
Through the chair to Board Member Anderson, I think A2, the request adjustment provides additional information about the program at the school.
Right.
So the adjustment really is about the program, not the main name of the school. So if we were using Mayport Middle is the main name of the school.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they want to adjust it to add, hey, we are big in coastal sciences. That's why we want to add this name adjustment. So let's just say 20 years from now, all the water dried up and there's nowhere to be doing coastal. So why is your name?
or the water covered up.
The water covered it up. So maybe it needs to be Mayport Oceanography. I don't know. The only thing you're adjusting is something to do with the program at the school. That's so.
and their principal is.
I think we need to, in my opinion, look at that language, because that is left open to interpretation as it is now, and I think, notwithstanding number 2, that, it doesn't define what I just heard you say clearly as to not adjusting the existing
So like the original
name of the school.
So you're saying instead of main, say the existing.
The existing would be different 20 years from now, then there would be a different name existing.
Well, I have an issue because, that's just going, it's like the tide turns. You get new leadership, and the leadership needs to go a different way. And I don't think that creates stability within your magnet program and within your community. There was a long-term plan in place, and now because of leadership changes at schools, at these 2 schools, I can tell you I have many constituents who are not happy at Joseph Stillwell because of the uniform policy. And I get verbal comments and I get written comments all the time because the standard has been lowered. And then when you're trying to make that continuity, we are about choice. And I think that the reason why we worked so hard at this program is because we wanted to recruit students in our district to our school. Not that they're going to Trinity and they're going to Eagles View and they're going to charter schools. And we were a turnaround school. And so I think we were very successful in getting these students back. We were a B last year. But because of the leadership change at the school, and I'm a witness, I was there the first day when the principal said, we are not going to follow the cadet manual. We're not going to hold these kids to the standard that we did last year. That creates all kind of issues with the faculty, with the staff, and with the students. And when you're trying, you've got 3 or 4 years into a program and you want that continuity, you want these kids to go to Ed White, you want there to be that, there's no sand, there's no foundation there. And I'm concerned that we don't have the proper procedures in place to make sure there's some stability with this. That if we get a new principal or something every 2 or 3 years, we're just changing programs. How can we make sure that that's not happening?
I remember, Dolores, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think it's a really important discussion, but I don't know that that's dependent on program implementation and how the region superintendents work with principals and the understanding of what the board has passed previously. I'm not sure that it's really dependent on the name. I hear what you're saying specific to Ed White with what's going on with what is the school's name and how do we track back to that and make sure that we have the appropriate one. I think that conversation that you're having makes sense to have in the context of a discussion about the implementation of our choice programs and what is the fidelity and accountability of those things, which I think is really important. And I think that question exists beyond the 2 schools that you brought up that are in your district. I just keep coming back to this idea of main portion. I don't know that existing is the exact right language, but I think we need to kind of hone in and define what do we mean by that so that it's not left to interpretation. And then the other one is under B5. The student approval for name adjustment, we here have as age appropriate. I think to me, that's more of an implementation. I think having student voice is what's important, and that we should leave how that is implemented to the superintendent and staff. And so I think it's non-substantive to strike that language, but I'm not sure that it is relevant to what the board is asking. I think it's more about the how.
So speaking of that, look at West Side. There was a lot of work in making sure that there were everybody everybody had sort of their say-so, and, you know, the students were very involved.
Yeah.
And it worked. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a very difficult transition for those of us on the board, getting yelled at. But I think it is important that everyone kind of knows what their role is, and so.
No, absolutely, and I'm saying, I think it's super important to keep those, like, student approval for the name change adjustment. I just think that as age appropriate, again, is kind of a how and up to staff as to, I think it was done very well previously, and that there was a lot of thoughtful implementation of that. Just as I read this, my initial thought was, does that mean that we don't always ask students as age appropriate? Why would that be kind of, you know, that the how and the implementation is largely left to staff? So I would rather not have that language so that we know that it's happening. It's just a matter of the implementation.
So, Ms. Chastain, is this something that we can discuss now on striking as age appropriate and coming up with a different word for Maine at this meeting, or is it something that would be more appropriate for the superintendent and her staff to work on, to run by you, have you review, and then bring back? Dr. Green.
Well, I thought I haven't suggested answer for number one, but then it does still go back to, is this a substantive change that needs to go back and be re-advertised?
Through the chair to the board, of the two issues, the one that concerns me the most is this concept of main portion, because this is really the threshold and the basis for this alternative procedure, and therefore that, in my mind, is substantive, and depending on the outcome, whether this would be delayed, like the FMLA policy as well, and, you know, just withdrawn and re-advertised for a subsequent meeting.
Would that be agreeable to the board, that the superintendent then make that change for one, that we could then, would that be something we bring back at a workshop or something, our policy? I have a feeling that there would be some conversation about not knowing what Dr. Green's new word would be, other than Maine. Can we hear that now, or is that something that has to go back?
We may as well, and really, so, I do want to point out, there's a cost in advertising, and so if there's something, you know, I would hate to re-advertise and bring things back, and it's still not right.
So can we hear her idea? So can we give suggestions?
Well, there's two
All right.
suggestions. And the reason why there's two, going back, this is only a section of that entire policy. So this is only the section on adjusting a school name. So one would have to ask, and I don't want to use Stillwell, let me use another school. I can't use Maple. I need one that the program is, okay, Stanford College, the name of Stanton College Preparatory High School. That is the name of Stanton. You see it as the name. So even if we said can't change its initial, well, it's so common that everybody thinks that's the name of the school. But the main portion of that name is Stanton High School, because it was Stanton High School prior to it becoming, wasn't it? Yeah. It was just Stanton High School. So I think either it's the original portion of the name of the school, because that was its original name, Stanton High School. Therefore now, let's just say again, back to Mayport, it's now underwater, so it needs to be, Mayport, middle, oceanography. What was the original portion of the name? It was Mayport Middle. That was the original. So change the word Maine The original portion of the name of the school shall not be changed. So no matter what happens with Ed White, the original portion is Ed White High School. No matter of Mayport, the original portion is Mayport Middle School.
What do you do with Forest and West Side?
Yeah, that's what I was.
That's a name change, it's not an adjustment.
That's not an adjustment. The original,
She said, what about Forest?
but that's not a name adjustment. That is a name change.
But if they wanted to adjust their name, you said it had to be the original, is the origin West Side or origin
That's
Forest?
the question.
Well, it was, since it was a formal name change, wouldn't it be, the adjustment would be West Side?
Somehow challenge it, so we gotta.
Would it be?
I actually, let me, maybe this may make it easier, it may make it harder.
Yeah.
I actually, as I read the rest of this policy with the SAC bringing it forward, the PTA approving, the faculty and staff using the shared governance process, the students being involved, I mean, this is basically a mini ACE process that is embedded here. So I'm not, I was more so trying to define and understand what was the intent of the policy than I am even, especially given that the financial burden has to rest on the school, than I'm even that concerned. I mean, if there was that much of an overwhelming, desire to bring to the board that the board then deliberates and passes or does not, to adjust the name of a school, I just think it's not clear from this. So maybe we just we see what comes.
The option B was the name of the school shall not be changed. So that's why if you don't say something, it either has to be the original portion of the name of the school or the main. Even if I say the name of the school, well, someone's going to argue, well, Stanton College Prep is the name of the school. Well, no, the main portion of the name of the school is Stanton. That's the part. That's the part of the.
If you said the latter part, like you said the latter part, then to answer board member Willie's question, then if at some point, I'm making this up, West Side Teacher Academy, because they're going to put that there, if that became their big thing, then you're making an adjustment to West Side, not somebody arguing going back to the former name before it was West Side.
Yeah,
that's done.
Or
I'm
option number 3.
I'm going to withdraw.
Oh, okay.
This is why I was going to talk to you about this offline, because I thought there's probably a good explanation in all of this that doesn't need to. So, unless I've now intervention.
I want to hear the third option.
Okay.
The third option is removing number 1 altogether. Only request and adjustment could be about additional information of the program at the school. Therefore, it is already implied, whatever the name of that you can't change the name of this, the main portion, the main part of the school, the original name, whatever name it has at that time. The only adjustment that could be made is about programmatic information that gives you more detail about
That
it.
reflects what's happening
What's happening
at the school, because there's a different process for a formal name change of an original school, which I think the both of you all were on the board when we got West Side High School.
So if you just remove number 1 and just say the requested adjustment must provide additional information about the program at the school. Period.
Okay.
Now we're not even, that's the only adjustment you're requesting to make.
Would we have to renotice that?
Yeah, Ms. Chastain, can we do that, or
I think so.
we have to renotice it and then bring it back for April? Okay.
So are we?
Yes.
Can we move, I have a question about number 3 though, under that same It says the requested adjustment will require only minimal changes to the signage, colors, mascot, team uniform logos. But my question is, when we changed, or when the board changed, Joseph Stillwell and Ed White, logos changed. Colors didn't change, but logos changed. There was a branding change. So, and that was a program.
What was the name?
It was a name change, but it was
It was an adjusted.
right. But we did change all of those. We changed the whole brand of the school.
Those still,
But
And
doesn't
Ed White
this,
changed.
well, but if you look at 4, does 4 apply to 3? That the burden is on the school to
That
pay
is-
for those,
That is correct.
so 4 applies to 3. So if the school,
that is expensive. And
Yeah.
it was.
the school has to cover the cost of, if our report applies to 3.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Can I just ask a practical question? What is limiting or prompting? I mean, we have an existing name change policy that's been in existence for a long time. It's been used, it's been applied, that allows for the, where is it? The renaming of existing schools. The SAC, the PTA, 75% of the school students, alumni,
The idea was to make it a little less stringent.
community members.
We had this conversation.
Yes, and so I guess we're kind of having all this consternation and all this, questioning of how this happens and that kind of thing. When we've had a policy that was created with a lot of intentionality.
Are you asking if we need this amendment to the original policy regarding name change?
Yeah, I mean, what's prohibitive about the policy as it exists, other than fixing it?
Through the chair to board members, whereas if you look at the policy prior to adding this section, really schools like Mayport, they're not renaming the existing school. They're simply adding more information to their name.
Right.
And the issue with, so who pays the cost, even if you, even if Mayport may have been, for all I know, they may have been using the coastal sciences on their letterhead and everything for a while, because they really weren't renaming the school. They were just adding more information about their school. So now they want to solidify it, and really the policy was about naming a new school or renaming an existing school, and based on your history, we took it Forest to West Side. That's renaming a school. You got completely eliminated the first name, and now you're coming up with a new name. And in what we're hearing from schools, that's not what they want to do. They just want to add more information about their school. So that's why we added this piece on name adjustment. And we still felt that, one, I'm hoping this don't lead back to Ed White conversation, but one, if we solidify, you had to still go, you just couldn't wake up one morning and say, I feel like we do coastal sciences. We took the children on a field trip and you woke up one morning, now you want to add that to your school name. And so we still felt it needed some teeth to say you had to go through this process, and oh, by the way, you have to put the cost of anything that needs to change, because you're not really changing the name of, you're making an adjustment.
And it has to be approved by the board.
Yes, and it has to be approved by the board.
I support the recommendation.
Any
Can you
disagreement to
repeat the recommendation?
What the final?
So what was the final
No, I
You
want me to strike number one or leave it as it is?
I support it. Anybody not support?
I don't know what we're supporting.
What's
in our book?
As originally presented by the superintendent.
I originally said I supported the recommendation. I just wanted to, you know, some clarification because,
But I do think what are we doing about the main portion?
Dr. Green
She's gonna
suggested.
keep it.
Keep it. But another name,
Dr. Green can explain that to
the main portion?
If I may, I think
Number 2 is.
if this process is adopted and then is implemented, I am assuming that the agenda item will explain how the recommendation complies with the elements of the policy.
But I thought maybe the idea of, what was one of your others, that, the original.
I think it's approved.
Talking about 4 o'clock, we had a 4 o'clock.
Oh,
Do you want, saying you don't like the portion?
Well, I think it is, to Ashley's, it's a little, what does that mean?
Okay.
I mean, it'd be better, I think, original says.
Or current.
Well,
I think there's a.
Because then you get back to, what about, approved name?
well, the approved name in Stanton is Stanton College Preparatory High School. That's why we use that.
Original
I think
approved?
that's why. Well, that goes back to Board Member Willie's and the Nathan B. Forrest West Side. The original was Nathan B. Forrest. So I think that's why we landed back at the main portion of the name of the school shall not be changed.
Can we still strike as age appropriate?
Can we strike as age appropriate?
Without having to renotice?
To put words in Board Member Smith Morris's mouth, I guess, is that she read that and had a question, but then going through it, I believe right, that was your question, is that, you wanted student voice.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not in any of the other places, but it's not in the.
So as age appropriate may indicate that an elementary school, for example, would not have student voice. I'm making that.
I don't think
have a fifth grader,
But
but I
to
can.
Board Member Smith Morris's point, she was asking that student voice be heard, no matter what age, what grade level.
Through the chair to Ms. Chastain, no other part of the policy says as age
No,
appropriate.
it's-
So
I
can
agree
we
with
just strike that with that?
So,
Or and I could argue.
I want to say this, but we actually don't have parallel paths now. So we're creating are we creating an intentionally different process for a name adjustment compared to a new name, or a name change? I think by virtue of this, the answer is yes. If you want to take out age appropriate, I think that's fine, but I really want to hear where we land, because if I start picking out certain elements, I just want to see where we are.
I would like to strike it.
What?
Oh, as age appropriate.
I would strike it.
Anyone else would want to weigh in on striking or keeping age appropriate
Yeah.
as presented?
We can strike. I'm confused at why you said that then changes the whole.
Wait, I didn't say in this case.
Okay.
I'm not saying it very well. We've talked about a number of
Okay.
things. And
I
so
thought it was
when I'm
just that.
starting to be pinned down on specific elements, I think it really depends on the big picture as to what revisions are being requested in policy 8.59 in total, not just one at a time.
Yes.
I think in total it was including student voice at all grade levels, if I heard Board Member Smith-Torres correctly, and then also
the other.
right. That
So if this is the only change, I'm okay, but if we're going to keep revising this, I may not be okay.
I think is everybody good?
So that's the only change.
I think it's. Yep. Okay, so we are, Dr. Pierce, do we have any public comment cards? We have public comment cards? We are moving into the workshop. You will see there's not governance because I wanted communications to have a chance to present. We have talked about forever, at least 3 years, I think, since that I'm aware of.
Before that.
Yes. A board member webpage, and under Dr. Pierce's leadership, he has put together the communications, put together a board member webpage, and I will let, and this is something that each board member would have, and what I would like to say is that it's going to change the look of the board member page when you go to it. It was my desire that every board member have a web page, no matter how tech savvy, if he tweeted, did Facebook, Instagram, that kind of stuff. Because other boards, some members had it and some didn't, and I didn't like the inconsistency. I thought it was better if it was something that, benefited every board member. Go ahead.
Through the chair, thank you, Chair Hershey. You've given me far too much credit. I'm going to actually demonstrate, but the credit goes to our Director of Marketing, Kevin Collins. She did all this work. But essentially, if you clicked on School Board, this is the page that you would initially come to, which is all of our board members, links to your email, phone numbers, information. And then we have this little piece right here, which the only one we've built out is Chair Hershey's at this stage, so just want to get everybody's feedback. As she mentioned last time we met, we use Broward County as sort of a model. So what you'll see in here in terms of the functionality is what Broward is providing its school board. Their template's a little different. We're a little restrained by our template, but I think we got all the functionality in there. So this would be your personal website. We use this space to bring your bio here with your pictures so people can read about you. And then the functionality or the tools that you would have available would be over here on the left. We have the simple list of the schools in your area. And then a photo gallery to record any of your school visits or community activities, anything that you want to put there. An opportunity, news from your district. This would be sort of a blogging platform, if you will, so you could write short blogs and you would have the, trying to get over, have the history of your blogs over here on the right. And then this would bring you back to the full page. I'm going to come back to Ms. Hershey's homepage. It's not loading for some reason. It could just be the internet connection, but this would be your tweet feed, your Twitter feed. Could also be your Facebook feed if you'd prefer that, or Instagram. Question came up, should you have more than one of those? We'd recommend one. A lot of your content is the same, and it would just be simpler, a simpler interface for users if you have one. If you wanted more, we could obviously do that.
So just so I know board member Anderson tweets because I see them. She's really, really good.
Can you do that?
Yeah, but what we could do if you did not want to tweet is that Dr. Pierce said then what we could do is run the district tweet. So it wouldn't be like, again, when I looked at other of the big 7 districts, and Nina did as well, some people had like a website and it was really good and other board members did not, and we were trying to create something that it would all be uniform, and there's going to be a tweet there whether it's yours or the district's. If you sent in or submitted photos to Nina to add to your photos, that would be great, but if that's not something you do,
then we could have a photo gallery that would link to district photos, you know, so that it wouldn't be like, oh, why is there so good? And, you know, we were trying to make it so that everybody looked good.
So tell me about the pictures. Is your team going to help us with this part as far as?
So we would be responsible. So if we wanted our own specific district pictures there, we would need to take them and submit them to Nina, who would then load them to the website. If
Could Nina just go with me?
Yes, she could. If you had something, you could ask her, and she could go with you to do that. If you didn't have any pictures, so it's not blank, we could then just link in district pictures there, so somebody could click through and see some. Right.
Yeah, we wouldn't leave you with a blank space if you
Yeah.
didn't have any pictures. We put some there as placeholders. But if you're out at your schools and you take pictures with your phone, you could just email those to Nina.
Yeah, you can email them today. You know, if you're out touring and you get a principal you get a picture with the principal, or there's you know.
We said we were going to get our grandchildren.
Yeah. But what do you think? Does this look okay? And the idea would be, and Nina could meet with each of us. We recognize that not everyone might want to put news from our districts, but but it would be our responsibility to let Nina know what we wanted to say. That could be done as often as we wanted, quarterly, annually, biannually, whatever. But that would be a conversation we have with Nina. Yes.
So 2 questions. One, just in terms of the feed where you said, this is where you can put information about your district. Can we just ask that as you all send out the Duval Spotlight, that if there are schools that are in our districts that are highlighted in that you pull that information and post it? Like oftentimes it will,
We can, we'll work out a process for Nina to.
Okay. And then second was, I know through the chair to Ms. Chastain, I know OGC is trying to keep up with the pace of technology as it relates to public records and Sunshine.
I don't know that it's OGC, I think it's the legislature.
Well, I think the legislature as well. I think it's Steve Durden who's doing some work on, what are the rules and how do they apply, especially as it relates to platforms like Twitter and others where, open access can be an issue as well as just commenting on who, once your thing is shared, are you required to maintain all of the records of that shared post, or are you only required to maintain the records of your own? There's some bigger questions in what applies to this, but what I'm curious about is if we are creating this as an additional record that is pulling from those platforms that are third party to the district in some cases. You may not have the answer right now, but what are the implications of that? And what's the responsibility of board members in terms of that? How does that all kind of interface? Does this then take care of that piece for us, which would be brilliant? And kind of how does all that play out?
So through the chair to Board Member Smith-Morris, so I did shout out that this is a legislative issue because the Sunshine Law was created obviously in a time where you didn't have this type of platform. So I have not had a chance to speak to Dr. Pierce and his department, but I'm assuming that this proposal will save the records. They'll be archived because once you create the record, you have to keep the record. As with anything, you don't speak to each other, as board members indirectly through a platform. You have to do it in a noticed meeting like this. When you do create the platform and you invite people to comment, they get to comment. That there's at least one decision that I'm aware of, I think in another state, where you can't block somebody from commenting on your Twitter accounts because you created the platform for the speech. So all of these types of issues that travel with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all the things, because I, don't do these things myself, but those those types of electronic platforms, the Sunshine Law as it applies to technological communications still applies. It's an awkward fit. And this, so the things that you need to do, keep it, can't restrict access, can't block people. That would be basically universal truth regardless of the electronic platform.
So, and I can tell you this, the idea to run that Twitter feed that tweets was not original to us. That was on, that was on other districts' websites. So this was not something that we just made up. And so I just would like to clarify that other districts are running either board member tweets or district tweets alongside of, each profile as well.
For those of you who do Facebook, is it a different Facebook than your family?
Your personal one?
Yeah.
The one that I have, I do have a Facebook page, but the only thing I put up there is if I go to a school and I take pictures. If I'm on Greenland Pines Facebook page and they're having a fundraiser, I share it to my page, or I put announcements. I don't say anything legislative, don't have anything. It's just pictures. Major, not y'all know we won the championship, so there's the football picture. And so, and there are other city council members have Facebook pages like that. I know that's not something that everybody wants. I find for me when I'm out in the district, the more people follow that than I realize. And so that's just a way to let them know what I'm doing. And they don't see that I'm in meetings like this, but I go visit 3 schools and I'm working really hard. And that's just
watching you right
they're watching me now say that, so they don't see. But I'm just saying, so for me, it's been a very beneficial thing. For example, for my Facebook, for when at the school expo, I got a picture of with board member Grimes and saw different people and posted that, things from the expo. So that's all that's on mine. It is not.
I know.
Yeah.
You sure?
See, I
take them, they're just on your post.
So anyway, that's what do you want to?
I do several. So I have an Instagram, I have a Facebook, I have a Twitter, and then I keep up my LinkedIn, but which is kind of like a full-time job. When I was getting it was pretty intense. But I do find that Facebook is the most accessible to people. I mean, I think that that's where a lot of people who are keeping up with schools and children and that sort of thing are there. I find to be Twitter a little bit more political and business oriented. So I do have different content that I'll push on from them. So I mean, I think that it depends on what your sort of personality is.
Well, now, you have to preserve that for so many years.
It's the preservation through the chair to Vice Chairman Jones.
Well, now, which one disappeared? I thought Instagram.
Snapchat.
Okay, so you don't have that platform.
So please don't use Snapchat.
Yeah.
Snapchat disappears. But based upon this, so we can stay on track, do you like the website? It's really created to be, I want to say, user-friendly for board members who want to put in news and be, write something. You can do it more frequently, but if you don't, if you choose just to do it biannually or something like that, you can. But everybody on this format is going to look professional, and because of the photo gallery, whether it's pictures that we take at schools and submit to Nina, or we ask her to come, or if we don't do that, it will be photos fed in. We can feed in photos from the district. Everybody, it's going to be more uniform no matter what your level of engagement is. Is that?
Can I have some questions? It's right up my alley. I love it that we could potentially have websites. Question though is how do we go about driving traffic to it, because it seems to be a little bit buried underneath a lot of things. So we'd have to generate traffic, I'm assuming. Like how many clicks would it take? Or I guess we could have it running.
That's what's the sign. It
is your first school board
Okay.
page.
So before it went to a general school board picture, right?
Yeah, we used that first page to get directly to your content.
Got it.
I thought that was the best way to do that.
So,
I would think that you could go to either this link or to your direct website link and then put that in on your LinkedIn or on your,
right.
other places where you could advertise it.
No, I think that's good. But I also would want folks to see that we are a cohesive board too. I think it's always good to, like, when you click on, it's like, hey, we're a board. It's like we're not just separate people with separate websites. We're a board that works together. So just like as a cultural note as people click, and then like back end use, like would I be able to go in and sit and change or adjust things, or would I have to go through Nina or communications?
Well, the goal right now is as it's set up now, is that we would give information to Nina and she would put that in. Nina, did you want to add anything?
I think to start, just go through me if you're one of those people, because I know some of you are, like Elizabeth and, board member Anderson and Willie are very hands-on with that, so I don't have a problem with that. I know that you all are very want to tech savvy and are into that type of thing, so that doesn't bother me. It's just giving you the access to be able to do that.
Got it.
And just the idea of having Nina do that is that we have a lot to do, and sometimes I don't know, for me anyway, I can think it, but sometimes it's easier for me to write it and say, hey, can you post this for me, versus taking that extra step.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really just more to assist. It's not certainly to restrict anybody who wants to do that, but just we can all be busy and that kind of stuff. And this is a responsibility that Nina has agreed to take on to help us manage these effectively. Because I can take pictures and send them, but that next posting them to the website, I just send them to Kathy, and it happens. Yes.
Well, my last question would be, like, when you're thinking about websites and interface, like, as it lands on that website, if it lands on the bio each time, I just wonder if you have a bunch of repeat users and they already know the bio, is that like the content that they would want to see right away? Or like that's the kind of question I would
We
ask.
just use that content to start with.
Got
If
it.
you wanted to replace that with the latest news at your district or whatever, you would have
Got
full
it.
control over that.
Mhm.
Yeah. And you can put your bio in as one of the news items that people can always see.
Perfect.
So you can change it again if you take the time and you want to go look at other websites. There was an inconsistency where 3 people had a website and 4 people didn't, or one person had a really good one and somebody else didn't have it. And I just wanted us to look more unified, and I wanted everybody to look good no matter what level of engagement, because to me that didn't give a very good, for me anyway, when I looked at it, Dr. Pierce can add to it, it's just that it was like, oh, well, it looks like this board member's doing this and this one's not, and it could have just been, what was your thought?
Well, again, it's about presenting professionalism of the organization. And so for everyone to have kind of the same platform, the same general things, the same user experience, if I go from Ms. Hershey's site to Mr. Willie's site or whatever, I think that is important and reflects on your professionalism as an organization. I also appreciate Mr. Wood's comment about the whole board.
Mm-hmm.
That was the picture you used to see when you came to this. There was no functionality beyond that picture. It was just a picture of all of you. We can replace that back across the top and have the full school board, and then your individual pictures and sites underneath of that would be, I think, a good improvement.
Any other thoughts or comments? Ms. Chastain, you were going to say something?
Yeah, so I mentioned to Dr. Pierce, and I'm sure Dr. Pierce and the board office will coordinate with respect to photos. Remember, student photographs are directory information, and we need to make sure that we have a media release for all of the students before anything like that's posted. So I just want to make sure there's all these things that happen when communications, works on the district's website, completely. So I do want to make sure that while this is wonderful, that we still, on behalf of the individual board members and your pages, that we are following those requirements.
So what do you do about that if you've gone into a classroom and, I don't know that every teacher would know whether or not their student has
In our experience, they typically do. When we go into the classrooms, we work directly with the school principal or the teacher. They know which of their students are cleared for photographs and which aren't. When we go into a general assembly, they'll point that out to us. So it's just a good practice if you're taking pictures to ask, as Ms. Chastain said, to ask that question and make sure you're including students that you are allowed to include.
And it depends too. I don't typically take pictures of students unless it's that if we're at the Choice Expo, which is a public place, you know, and they're there as student leaders, you know, doing something that's different than being in the classroom. So that's the rule of thumb that I use. The event that we had when Representative Fisher contributed money to Mandarin Oaks, at that event, the students who were in there, you know, were able to be photographed and things.
They were screened in advance.
Yeah, they were screened in advance. So you will have some things that that will already be done.
Are principals and staff fair game as far as photos?
I've never had a principal say one, because if I take a picture, I'm like, do you mind if I post this? They love it.
No, but they don't have to sign anything with photo release, or they already signed that in the contract, I'm assuming?
Through the chair to board member Willie, I'm not familiar with the employment agreement as to whether that's in there, but my comment for the students was a FERPA comment.
And you just, I always ask, but I've never had anybody say, no, don't post that too.
It'd be really bad if you say, please get a photo with me. I don't want to get a photo.
Please don't post it.
That's right.
Is everyone okay with this format and us moving forward? We've talked about it, I know at least for 3 years, it could be 8 years. And then we could set up individual times to talk with Nina about what our individual input would be. Is everyone okay with having everybody's template made up so that we could get this going sooner rather than later?
One more suggestion to the template, just knowing that communication is moving much more visual than, well, and I mean image than written. Is it possible to do some kind of, can you click on it again?
Yeah.
On when you have this landing page, to have the photo gallery that scrolls somewhere or something that's a little more dynamic about that page? I don't know that if I'm going to find information about what's going on, I don't mind having a separate photo gallery tab if someone's trying to find, like, I know that this person was at this event and I want to see, but this just, I know we'll have the tweets, which will look a little bit more dynamic, but
so we could make this little widget more part of the front page if you'd like that.
Yeah.
Like they do at the schools. When you click on a school, it's just pictures of what's going on at the school.
Yeah, it's that carousel across the top. So we could integrate that into the front page for sure. And then probably make your bio a separate link to your comment, to Board Member Willie's comment. That's good information the first time you see it, but you may not want to see that every time. Yeah. So we could kind of make that a left-hand link, so if someone wants to see your bio, they can. But the front page a little more dynamic. Sure.
Cool. Thank you.
And the other thing too, just wanted to point out, this is important, again, based upon our conversation about communications and where we're going and redoing the website. The fact that it stays here because it's part of Duval County. I believe there were some people that went off to a whole different website, you know, and so it was really important to kind of keep it all embedded in the district site versus going out somewhere else.
Part of Team Duval.
Yeah. And then we have 7 different websites. So.
If I wanted to add something like a calendar of events, would that need to be something that was on everyone's site, or could
you put that in news from the district and talk to Nina about what that looked like?
Sure.
Maybe you could have some verbiage and you could put it. She could put it, scroll in the calendar for you or something, or.
Yeah, I think if it's going to be over here on the left, it's going to be on everybody's.
Yeah. Okay. So if
you did it as part of your blog, you know, here's the calendar for the next month or the next week.
All these letters.
Yeah.
And like I said, you can do it weekly if you want, you can do it monthly, it's just up to you. It's up to each individual person, and I think one-on-one conversation with Nina will give her an idea. Some will certainly be more engaged than others, but again, it was just important to me that we all looked like we were engaged and out there and not like, oh, why, you know,
What does this person do?
yeah, this person doesn't do anything, there's no, you know. So, thank you.
Good job.
More revised agreement.
That's good.
Anything else? All right, would anyone like to suggest that we?
So moved.
Second. It was moved by Board Member Grimes and seconded by Vice Chair Jones that we leave. But before we do, just want to remind that today at 2 o'clock we have a special meeting for the grievance continuation. And that would be Vice Chair Jones, myself, Board Member Joyce, and Board Member Anderson, who would need to be back in this room by 2 o'clock.
And I think Kathy got with folks yesterday, but with the addition of the board auditor and some posting and that kind of thing, we're going to be reorganizing for the evaluation as well. So look for that.
Okay. So some of us have an hour before we're back in this room. So
I hope you all have a lot of fun.
Amen.
Been there.
That's right.
That's
more than once.
So we have very photos that are in the stream now.
Obviously, since you
Rotate every
let's wrap it up as first.
You know, 15. Yeah, because depending on the side of the face.
Sorry, I guess. Thank you.
That's cool. Is it easy though?
I hope so.